Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
Blood rushed to my ears the moment I overheard her vile secret. They laughed about splitting everything, half for each poisonous desire. In that instant, I realized my life was a lie. No tears, no pleas, just a tidal wave of cold betrayal. I left everything behind but carried one relentless purpose: revenge. Every mile driven, every motel room booked fueled my rage. At dawn, I toiled on Dusty Ranch to mask identity. She lost her paramour, lost her fortune, hunts for me. A ranch stands between her greed and my last stand. Beneath these sun-scorched fences, I discovered loyalty, love, and hope. Before we begin, let me know where you're tuning in from down in the comments. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale. I could tell something was off the moment I walked into the office on Monday morning. My boss, Mr. Harrington, summoned me with a curt email, subject line: "Need to discuss mistake in Q2 reporting." That was how the day started, my coffee still half finished, my nerves frayed from a restless night. And it only got worse. It turned out the spreadsheet error wasn't even mine, but a junior analyst's oversight. Yet I was the one singled out. By noon, I was quietly cursing my entire existence. I'd never had a day where I wanted to curl up under my desk and vanish quite so badly. I tried calling Melanie on my lunch break, just a quick check-in to hear a comforting voice. Normally, she would pick up and tease me about being such a workaholic. But this time, my call went unanswered. A slight annoyance tugged at the back of my mind, but I brushed it off. She was probably busy. It wasn't unusual for her to have a late lunch with her sister, Nicole, or to be at the gym. After a dreadful commute, I finally got home around 7 p.m. The moment I stepped inside, the uneasy quiet struck me. Our townhouse, located on a neat cul-de-sac lined with identical units, felt darker than usual. Melanie's car was out front, so I expected the lights to be on, the TV humming, maybe some music playing. Instead, it was painfully silent. I dropped my briefcase near the entry table. My tie felt suffocating, so I loosened it and called her name. No reply. As I passed by the living room, I noticed a soft glow coming from upstairs. The only light came from the second floor. That's when I heard her voice, low, urgent, and definitely not meant for me to overhear. Quietly, I walked up the carpeted steps, every creak feeling like a betrayal to my own stealth. I've known Melanie for 5 years, married her 3 years ago, and I've never once been so hesitant to call out. Something in my gut told me to proceed with caution. At the landing, I could make out Melanie's voice more clearly. She was behind the guest bedroom door, the one we typically kept closed because we used it mostly for storage and Nicole's occasional overnight stays. The door was slightly ajar. I stepped closer. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she'd hear me. "Nicole, I can't keep waiting. Chase wants me to move in with him," Melanie said. Chase. The name felt familiar, but I couldn't place it right away. "He's convinced I'm wasting my time with Ethan." There was a soft murmur in Nicole's voice, though I couldn't make out her exact words. Melanie responded, "Are you kidding me? Today alone, I slept with him, actually. We did it twice this week, and that was only because I couldn't get away on Wednesday." She gave a bitter laugh. "I'm so tired of sneaking around. I'm ready to end this marriage. Ethan's clueless." I was not clueless anymore. My entire body went cold, like I'd stepped into a freezer. Each word drove a nail into my chest, and I couldn't breathe. My wife was cheating on me with someone named Chase, and Nicole apparently knew about it. I leaned forward, ears straining to catch more. The next words shattered me further. "If we get divorced, it's half of everything, right? That's community property. I'm counting on that. Chase and I could use the money to start fresh somewhere else." A suffocating silence fell. In that moment, I wasn't sure if my heart would keep beating. My jaw clenched, nails digging into my palms so hard it hurt. There was no misunderstanding. The woman I loved was plotting to leave me, presumably after bleeding me dry. I edged away from the door before I could hear Nicole's response. Maybe she was complicit. Maybe she was just a silent bystander. None of it mattered right then. My entire life had cracked open, exposing a hollow, ugly core I'd never suspected. Backing down the stairs, I realized I had to be strategic. The rage pulsed hot and wild under my skin, urging me to barge in and scream at Melanie, to smash every piece of furniture in that bedroom. Yet a strange, steely calm fell over me instead. If I confronted her right now, it would all spiral out of control. She'd deny it, or worse, turn the tables. From her conversation, I already knew she had an agenda with that ex-boyfriend, and maybe she was prepared for a confrontation. No. If I was going to survive this, I had to be smart. Cold logic. That was the only way to protect myself from the woman I'd once believed was my soulmate. I retreated to my car in a daze. My breath came out in ragged bursts as I slid into the driver's seat, locking the door as if that could keep the horror at bay. The night was mild outside, but I felt stifled, sweat forming at my temples. I just sat there, staring at my reflection in the windshield. 1,000 thoughts ricocheted through my mind. The marriage, the future we'd planned, the life savings I'd worked so hard to build. And now, she was hooking up with some old flame named Chase, fully intending to strip me of half my assets. I might have spent an hour in that car, though it felt like mere minutes. At some point, the overhead street lamp flickered on, bathing me in pale orange light. I knew I had to go back inside eventually. Melanie couldn't suspect anything yet, or my advantage would be lost. When I finally entered, I forced my breathing to steady and tried on a casual smile. She was downstairs, alone now, leaning against the kitchen counter with a glass of red wine in her hand, phone in the other. I wondered if she'd just finished texting Nicole or Chase. Probably. She glanced up. "Hey, babe. You're home late. Everything okay?" I nodded, crossing over to the fridge for a bottle of water. "Yeah, Harrington raked me over the coals about someone else's mistake. Took forever to get things sorted out. You?" My question hung in the air. She shrugged. "Quiet day. Nicole stopped by for a bit. I just did laundry, a few errands. The usual. The usual. Right. No mention of calls, no confession of that conversation about leaving me for another man. She was so practiced at lying that her face was blank, calm, even sweet. I took a sip of water, my hand trembling slightly. "I'm beat. I'll just head up, maybe watch some TV in bed." She offered a tiny, sympathetic pout. "Aw, you work too hard. But sure, go rest. I might stay down here a bit and finish my wine." And that was it. No big red flags from her side, no guilt on display. I realized then how easily she could fake normalcy. Perhaps she'd been doing it for months. In that numb haze, I felt a dark spark alight within me. Let her play innocent. Let her believe I was naive, because now I knew her secret, and I would not be a victim. Climbing the stairs felt heavier than usual, like I was carrying an invisible weight on my shoulders. All I could think was, we made vows. We dreamed of a future together. Had none of it been real? Or had she changed along the way, starved for excitement? I pictured the wedding album stashed in our closet. I pictured all the times we spent planning dinners for friends or traveling to see new places, all overshadowed now by a single vicious fact: she was unfaithful, and I was her oblivious fallback. My mind buzzed with an urgent question. What happens next? The conversation I overheard forced me onto a new path. I wouldn't walk away empty-handed and humiliated. If she wanted a fight, she would get a fight. But I wouldn't let her see the blow coming. Not yet. I opened our bedroom door and flipped on the light. Everything looked the same. Neutral gray walls, the bed with that plush comforter Melanie had insisted on, the nightstands we picked out together. It felt surreal that my whole world had changed, yet the room remained as tidy, as ordinary as ever. Tossing my jacket on a chair, I took a moment to collect myself. My heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through me. With shaky hands, I grabbed my phone. I needed to do some research, figure out my next steps. Sure, this was an emotional apocalypse, but for the first time in my life, I sensed I was capable of a certain cunning. If she wanted half my life, I'd make sure she only got scraps. I didn't know exactly how I would manage it, but I knew I had to start planning immediately. Betrayal like this demanded a response. I'd heard of men who became unhinged after discovering an affair, losing everything in messy divorces. I refused to be that man. I'd find a way to protect my assets and my pride. The overhead light suddenly flickered. Then I heard Melanie's soft footsteps padding down the hall. She paused outside the door, probably deciding whether to come in or leave me alone. My entire body stiffened, and I pressed my phone screen to my chest as if she could read the damning knowledge on it. After a beat, she continued down the hallway to the guest room. A few seconds later, I heard the door click shut. Maybe she was grabbing her phone charger or folding leftover laundry. Maybe she was texting Chase. The thought made my stomach twist. I sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaling slowly. Tomorrow, everything would still appear normal, and I'd have to play along. But tonight, I would not sleep easily. Tonight was the beginning of something dark, a path I never thought I'd walk down. But here I was, determined and fueled by anger, quietly preparing to dismantle the life Melanie thought she'd steal away from me. The next morning, I woke to the alarm's harsh buzz, my head still thick with the prior night's revelations. Melanie was already downstairs, rummaging in the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted up the stairs, as if this were any other day. It felt absurd how normal everything seemed, like an eerie masquerade. I brushed my teeth and stared at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot, my face pale. It struck me that I had to pull myself together if I was going to get away with gathering evidence and formulating a plan without Melanie catching on. Downstairs, I found her dressed in a casual blouse and jeans, sipping her coffee. She tossed me a bright smile. "Hey, want eggs?" I was about to make some. The domestic offer turned my stomach, but I forced a neutral expression. "Sure, thanks." I needed her to remain clueless, which meant faking every small moment. While she turned to the stove, I scrolled through emails on my phone, ignoring the wave of conflicting emotions that threatened to swamp me. Among the spam and newsletters, a half-forgotten message from my friend Marcus caught my eye. It was short, just a check-in, but seeing his name sparked an idea. Marcus was a financial consultant in another state. If anyone could advise me on protecting my assets, it was him. My mind began to churn with an elaborate plan. Open new accounts, perhaps even move funds offshore. Make it all invisible to Melanie. If community property laws stated she could get half of everything, I needed to ensure my everything was as small as possible when the time came. Melanie's voice broke through my reverie. "Ethan, you okay? You look a million miles away." I forced a laugh. "Just thinking about that fiasco at the office. Looks like I'll be dealing with spreadsheets all week." She served me a plate of scrambled eggs, her expression full of sympathy. For a second, I almost believed she cared. Then I remembered her conversation Chase wants me to move in with him. That cynicism settled over me like armor. If she felt guilty, she hid it better than a seasoned poker player. My mind flicked to Nicole, the sister who apparently knew everything. She and Melanie had always been tight, but I never suspected they'd plot behind my back. Did Nicole truly support this affair, or was she just stuck in the middle? One day, I'd figure it out. For now, I'd keep to my own mission. At work, I found myself more focused than usual, ironically. Harrington was still annoyed about the Q2 fiasco, but I churned out new reports swiftly. My real focus, though, was on intervals, pockets of time where I could send messages without being noticed. By mid-afternoon, I'd set up a secure messaging app on my phone and arranged a call with Marcus. That call took place in my car after I left the office. With the windows rolled up and the engine off, I explained to Marcus in broad strokes that I suspected marital issues and needed to safeguard my finances. I didn't spell out the entire fiasco, just enough so he understood the urgency. He clicked his tongue. "Man, I'm sorry to hear that. But you know me, I can definitely help. Offshore accounts, if done right, are legal and can provide a layer of anonymity. You'll need a separate LLC or trust. Are you sure you want to take that route?" My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Absolutely. This is a serious betrayal, Marcus. I can't let her walk away with half." He sighed. "All right, I'll compile some info for you. We can start opening those accounts under a shell entity. But you gotta keep things hush, you know?" I thanked him, heart pounding. This was happening. I was actively preparing for a divorce meltdown, or at least the inevitability that Melanie would file once she realized I wasn't going to tolerate her affair. At home that night, Melanie said she was going to Nicole's place. A flicker of suspicion stung me. Maybe she was meeting Chase instead, but I played along. "Sure, have fun. Tell Nicole I said hi." She left in a swirl of perfume and quiet steps. As soon as the front door clicked shut, I headed to my laptop. I typed in multiple search queries: community property laws in our state, spousal support guidelines, asset protection. I'd never navigated these legal waters, but I was a quick study. In bullet points, I jotted down potential vulnerabilities: our joint checking account, the house, my 401k, and any investment portfolios. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. If Melanie decided to divorce me in a straightforward scenario, she could indeed claim half. Unless, of course, I took preemptive measures. That swirl of bitterness flared again. I had always been a caring partner, paying more than my share of bills, encouraging her to take breaks from work when she was burned out. All that generosity would now be used against me. Around 10, she returned, looking oddly flushed. "Nicole says hi. We ended up at this new wine bar. Pretty nice place. You should check it out sometime." I glanced up from the living room sofa. "Maybe," I replied, forcing a neutral tone. "Sounds like you had a good time." She nodded, eyes flicking to her phone. Probably checking for a message from Chase. I had to stifle the urge to snatch it away and read everything. Instead, I bit my tongue and forced a yawn. The next few days followed a similar pattern. I immersed myself in work, hammered out details with Marcus, and quietly started consolidating accounts. I canceled some credit cards, feigning frustration with high interest rates. Melanie barely batted an eye. She rarely asked about finances, unless she wanted to buy something. One evening, Nicole actually dropped by the house while Melanie was out picking up dinner. I was in the living room scanning the news on TV. Nicole let herself in with a spare key they both used freely. She froze upon seeing me. "Oh, hey, didn't realize you were home." An awkward pause lingered between us. I wondered if she knew that I was no longer clueless. She wore her usual friendly smile, but there was something guarded in her gaze. "Melanie said you had a tough week at work. You doing okay?" "Fine," I lied, returning her small talk. "Just some deadlines." She nodded, shoving her hands into her jacket pockets. Cool. I'll just wait for her. She texted me to come over." I gestured for her to sit, but she hovered near the kitchen door. We ended up in a strained silence. Then my phone buzzed a text from Marcus confirming a transfer had gone through. I kept my face impassive and pretended it was a spam message. "So," I said, clearing my throat, "Melanie mentioned she and you were heading out tomorrow for some shopping?" Nicole blinked. "Yeah, she wants a new outfit. She said something about a date night you two might have." For a moment, I just stared at her, realizing Melanie must be weaving a web of lies in every direction. But I forced a smile. "Oh, right. She did mention that. I guess we'll see." Nicole's eyes flickered with something guilt, maybe. Then she looked away. Before we could continue, Melanie returned, arms laden with takeout bags. The tension in the air snapped. Nicole and Melanie swapped breezy greetings. The entire act was nerve-wracking. That night, I called Marcus again, stepping outside so Melanie couldn't overhear. I explained the urgency of completing all transfers soon. He asked if there was any chance of reconciliation. I hesitated, picturing Melanie's cheerful smile contrasted with the memory of her confession. "He wants me to move in with him half of everything." My voice came out flat. "No, I don't see us coming back from this. She doesn't know I know, but I can't trust her again." Marcus was quiet for a heartbeat. "All right, I'll finalize a timeline for the rest of your assets. Keep me posted, man." We ended the call. Above me, the sky was a deep navy blue, a few stars just visible beyond the city glow. The evening air felt oddly liberating. Despite the ache in my chest, I felt a steely determination anchoring me. If Melanie wanted to corner me legally, I'd block her path. If she wanted to fight, I'd be prepared. Smiling grimly to myself, I headed back inside. The unfolding plot was already in motion, and I intended to see it through to the end no matter how dark or twisted it became. Melanie's phone buzzed on the coffee table for the third time that evening. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through recipes and hollering about how we needed more fresh vegetables. I pretended not to notice the phone lighting up, but inside, my curiosity roared. Was it Chase again, or Nicole, or just a spam text? I tried to focus on the local news playing on TV. A story about rising property taxes droned in the background. My mind was far from property taxes, though. I kept recalling the conversation I'd overheard between Melanie and Nicole. I wondered if Melanie felt any guilt or fear. She acted normal, too normal. Eventually, she wandered back into the living room, dish towel in hand. "Hey, can you check if we have any chicken stock left? I might do a soup tomorrow." I nodded, feigning casual obedience, and headed to the pantry. We had a few boxes there, courtesy of one of Melanie's impulsive shopping sprees. As I rummaged, I heard her phone buzz again. Then came the slight rustle of her picking it up. The hush told me she was reading something. She rarely left her phone unlocked around me anymore. I'd noticed that subtle change in her habits, flipping the screen face down, being quick to input her passcode. At first, I'd chalked it up to normal privacy. Now I saw it in a different light. Returning with the stock, I handed it to her. She forced a bright smile. "Thanks. I'll remember to put it on my shopping list. Maybe we can do a nice dinner next week if work calms down for you." Her voice held that same sweet note as always, but I caught the flicker of nervousness in her eyes. Did she sense my growing distance? Or was she simply anxious that her web of lies might unravel at any moment? I said nothing about the phone. Instead, I rummaged in the fridge for a drink. The fridge's hum filled the silence. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. My entire strategy hinged on letting her believe I remained ignorant. That night, Nicole stayed over. She claimed her apartment's AC was busted and she wanted a place to crash. Melanie set up the guest bedroom for her, ironically the very room I'd overheard them talking in days earlier. I found it painful to watch them chat and laugh as though everything was normal. I even joined them for a bit in the living room, where some random reality show played. Nicole nursed a glass of wine while Melanie sipped herbal tea. I stuck to water, not trusting myself to loosen my tongue with alcohol. Part of me wanted to corner Nicole to see if she'd crack under pressure. Yet I stayed silent, letting the tension fester in the back of my mind. "Everything okay, Ethan?" Nicole asked suddenly during a commercial break. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were searching. "Sure," I replied. "Just tired from work, tired. Boss is on my case these days." She nodded sympathetically, and we dropped it. I observed the small details, the way Nicole's phone also seemed to light up frequently, how she'd glance at it, then quickly set it face down. The two sisters were definitely coordinating something, but I couldn't confirm if Nicole was 100% supportive of Melanie's plan. Later in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning overhead. Melanie fell asleep beside me, her breathing steady, her phone on silent mode. My thoughts whirled. The notion of confronting her directly tugged at me. It would be so easy to demand she come clean. But then I remembered what I stood to lose if I handled this the wrong way. The next morning, a Saturday, arrived with a quiet hush in the house. Nicole was still asleep in the guest room. Melanie seemed a bit restless, pacing around the kitchen with her coffee mug. I pretended not to notice. I poured my own coffee and flipped through my phone, scanning for any updates from Marcus. He'd emailed me after midnight, listing the next steps in funneling my assets to a newly formed LLC. My heart gave a fierce jolt. We were close to the final stretch. Once everything was secure, Melanie's future divorce threat wouldn't harm me financially. "Ethan," Melanie said, leaning against the counter, "I'm thinking of heading out for a bit, maybe pick up some groceries. You need anything?" I mustered a polite smile. "No, I'm good." She nodded, eyes darting away. "Right. I might meet Nicole for brunch if she's up to it." The moment she left, I felt a surge of relief. The house was still, with just Nicole's muffled footsteps upstairs. I retreated to the living room, opened my laptop, and began finalizing transfers. I was so engrossed I didn't notice Nicole quietly stepping behind me until she spoke. "Morning," she said. I nearly jumped. Quickly, I closed my laptop, trying to look casual. "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to startle you." I forced a laugh. "It's fine. You need something?" She glanced around as if expecting Melanie. "Actually, I'm heading out soon. I wanted to check if you knew where Mel went." My throat tightened. "Groceries, I think. Possibly brunch with you." Nicole frowned. She never texted me that. Huh, maybe she changed her mind. That slight discrepancy only validated my suspicions. Melanie was likely off to see Chase, using Nicole as a convenient cover story. My temper flared, but I masked it quickly with a shrug. "Maybe she'll text you. You know how she is impulsive." Nicole chuckled softly. "Right." She lingered another moment, eyes darting to my closed laptop. It felt like she was about to say something else, maybe something important. But in the end, she just murmured, Well, I better head out. Tell her to call me if she needs anything. I nodded and she left. Once I was alone, I exhaled shakily. The quiet tension at home was getting suffocating, but ironically it worked to my advantage. Melanie's complacency gave me freedom to continue my plan. Before lunch, I hopped in my car and drove to a bank across town. This was part of my strategy. Opening a safe deposit box under my name only, transferring some valuables, old family heirlooms, and a few official documents I didn't want lying around the house. I'd never been so methodical in my life. The process took about an hour. Walking back to my car, I suddenly felt the weight of it all. The love I once held for Melanie, the plans we made, all overshadowed by her betrayal. If not for that overheard conversation, I'd still be in the dark. My chest tightened with a familiar ache, but I gritted my teeth and pressed on. When I returned home, Melanie was in the living room, glancing through a clothing catalog. She flashed me a bright smile. "I was just about to text you, thought maybe we could do dinner out tonight, just the two of us." Her suggestion nearly made me laugh out loud in disbelief. She wanted a nice dinner date with me while sneaking around with her ex-boyfriend behind my back. The hypocrisy was staggering. Yet I put on my best earnest face. "Sure, that sounds nice. Where'd you have in mind?" She named a trendy fusion restaurant downtown, one we'd tried exactly once before. She hopped off the couch, rummaging for her phone. "I'll make the reservation," she said, then paused. "Hey, Ethan, you sure you're okay with everything? You've seemed a bit distant lately." My heart hammered. Was she catching on? Slowly, I forced a soft smile. "Just stressed about work. Sorry if I've been preoccupied. I'd love a night out. It'll help me relax." She eyed me carefully, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." I climbed the stairs to shower, letting the tension swirl inside me unseen. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope. One misstep, and everything would come crashing down. But soon, if all went according to plan, I'd be the one pulling the strings. After my shower, I stared at my reflection, noticing the subtle changes in my face, the faint circles under my eyes, the grim set of my jaw. But also something else resolve. I pictured the near future. Maybe she would serve me with divorce papers, expecting me to be blindsided. Maybe Nicole would help her orchestrate it. Well, let them think they have the upper hand. I dried off, changed into fresh clothes, and reminded myself that this hush of tension was short-term. The facade would eventually break. And when it did, I would be ready. The wind whipped my face as I stood by the trunk of my car at 10:30. Streetlights buzzed overhead, illuminating the small suburban driveway. My heart pounded. I'd told Melanie I had a short business trip, a last-minute request from Harrington, I'd claimed. She believed it, or at least she acted like she did. She even gave me a peck on the cheek, saying she'd miss me. Now, as I quietly loaded a small suitcase into the trunk, my mind replayed the moment I overheard that conversation about Chase. The memory fueled a sharp determination. My plan was nearly complete. Offshore accounts secured, credit cards canceled, valuables stashed away. Step by step, I dismantled the financial foundation that Melanie intended to split down the middle. I stared at the back window of the townhouse. The lights were off. She was likely upstairs, texting or calling him Chase with a triumphant grin, unaware that the rug was about to be pulled from under her. The rage I once felt had simmered into a cold efficiency. I took a deep breath and climbed into the driver's seat. My phone pinged with a final message from Marcus. "All set. Funds transferred. Don't forget to keep your new phone hidden. Safe travels, man." I'd already purchased a prepaid phone. The old line would remain at home, eventually leading nowhere, just static. I started the engine, fighting the urge to peel out and vanish into the night with a screech of tires. Instead, I eased the car down the cul-de-sac, turning off my headlights until I reached the main road. A few miles away, I pulled into an empty parking lot behind an abandoned strip mall. My hands trembled as I took out my wedding ring, the ring I'd worn since our ceremony. The irony was bitter. We had matching rings engraved with the words, "Forever and Always." Gently, I placed it in a small box on the passenger seat. Then I typed a quick note to Melanie on my old phone. "I'll be out of town for a few days. See you soon." It was the last message I'd send from that number. Once done, I shut the phone off and removed the SIM card, snapping it in half. The wind rattled a chain-link fence nearby, underscoring the hush of an otherwise quiet city night. With the ring hidden away and the phone essentially destroyed, I pulled back onto the road, heading for the freeway. The plan was to drive several hours south, switch to a different set of license plates I'd bought online, then continue onward until I could find a motel. No credit cards, just cash. Everything had been arranged meticulously. As the streetlights blurred by, my thoughts drifted to the life I was leaving behind. The townhouse, my job, the neighbors, my routine, and Melanie, the woman who had once made me feel alive but ultimately reduced me to a pawn in her betrayal. Did I feel regret? A shred of sadness, perhaps, but overshadowed by self-preservation. After about 2 hours, I pulled into a rest stop. The night was chilly. A single fluorescent lamp buzzed overhead as I swapped license plates. My heart hammered the entire time, half expecting a patrol car to roll by. But no one came. Within 10 minutes, I was back on the road, effectively invisible to Melanie's future attempts to trace me. At around 2 a.m., I found a small, dimly lit motel along a secondary highway. I parked in the corner, used a fake name, and paid in cash for a single night. The room smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and cleaning solution, but I was too drained to care. Setting my suitcase on the worn chair, I locked the door behind me with a heavy click that echoed in my chest. Despite my exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every time I shut my eyes, I pictured Melanie's face the day she'd presumably realize I was gone, and her money was gone too. Would she panic? Call the police to report me missing? My lips curled at the thought I wasn't missing. Not in the sense she'd want. I was simply out of reach. At some point, I dozed off. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the frayed curtains. My back ached from the lumpy mattress, but a grim determination roused me. Showering quickly in tepid water, I changed into a set of clothes I'd specifically packed for traveling. Then I sat at the small table near the window, a weak coffee in hand, reviewing the folder containing documents from Marcus. It was official. I had severed all immediate ties. The checking account under my name had a negligible balance. My investments were liquidated, reappearing safely under an LLC formed out of state, with a portion placed in an offshore institution. The rest I had in a brand new account under a corporate entity. By the time Melanie tried to use my old info, she'd find almost nothing. I recalled her words, "He wants me to move in with him. I'll get half of everything." And a bitter satisfaction flared. She'd get next to nothing. After finishing my coffee, I tidied up my belongings and headed out. The clouds hung low, matching my mood. I had no illusions that my heartbreak would vanish just because I'd run away. Betrayal stung. Part of me still wanted answers as to why she did it, but another part, the pragmatic part, insisted I accept the truth. She simply didn't love me enough to stay faithful. I turned onto a rural route, aiming for smaller towns. I needed to vanish further, find an environment where no one would think to look for me. As I drove, my mind cycled through possibilities. Maybe a quiet agricultural spot? Lauki, minimal records. Sometime around noon, I stopped at a gas station. While pumping gas, I overheard 2 men in cowboy hats chatting about farm equipment. They complained about labor shortages and how city folks rarely understood the tough side of country life. Something in their casual conversation drew my interest. Maybe a job working Hanson, far from the corporate world, was exactly the cover I needed. Finishing up, I paid cash inside and bought a local map. My plan was no plan I would keep moving until something felt right. I didn't bother to check the phone, my new prepaid one, because I knew I had zero reason to expect calls or texts. I was alone in the world by choice. Over the next couple of hours, the scenery transitioned from suburban sprawl to rolling fields. An unspoken tension coiled in my chest. It was all so surreal. Just days ago, I was living as a married man, complaining about normal day-to-day annoyances, unaware how close my personal apocalypse was. At a lonely intersection, I pulled over to stretch my legs. The sky was wide, the horizon dotted with farmland. My phone beeped with a low battery warning. I rummaged in the glove compartment for a charger, then noticed the small box containing my wedding ring. I stared at it for a long moment. The ring felt heavier than it should, a small band of metal carrying the weight of broken vows. No, I wasn't going to let sentimental attachments derail me. I put the ring back in the box and shoved it into the glove compartment. Maybe I'd pawn it someday or toss it in a river didn't matter right now. Back in the driver's seat, I set off again, heading deeper into rural territory. The day stretched on, a blur of fields, dusty roads, and the occasional cluster of old buildings. The further I went, the more I felt a sense of raw possibility. Here nobody knew Ethan, nobody cared about Melanie or her ex-boyfriend. The baggage of my old life weighed only on my mind, not on the environment around me. By dusk, I pulled into a quiet roadside motel with a neon sign reading, "Vacancy." The young clerk behind the desk barely looked up from his phone as he handed me a room key for the night. Once again, I paid in cash, no questions asked. With a suitcase in one hand and a renewed sense of resolve, I walked across the cracked pavement to my door. Inside, I sank onto the squeaky bed, exhaling a long breath. My plan of vanishing was in full swing, yet it was only part of the puzzle. I knew I might soon need a job, a stable place to hole up. For now, though, I took comfort in the fact that every mile away from that townhouse was a mile away from being a naive pawn in Melanie's scheme. Somewhere in the recesses of my mind, a voice whispered that I wasn't just leaving out of fear, I was also setting the stage for something bigger, a brand of retribution that Melanie would never see coming. And so, that night, under the flickering fluorescent lamp of a nondescript motel, I allowed myself to dream of a future where I was free from the lies, free from the heartbreak, and fully in control of my destiny, even if it meant forging a new identity entirely. I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the air conditioner lull me. Outside, the parking lot was silent, save for the distant rumble of a passing truck. Tomorrow, I would keep driving until I found a place that felt hidden enough, safe enough to plan the next move in my quiet, methodical revenge. For the first time in weeks, I managed a small, genuine smile because this wasn't merely an escape. It was the beginning of a much larger reckoning. I woke up in a dingy motel room with the stale odor of cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains. The muted sunlight filtering through the thin drapes hinted at an early morning, though I wasn't exactly sure of the hour. Time had started to feel irrelevant. I was somewhere off Highway 26 at least. That's what the cheap roadside sign had claimed when I pulled in late last night. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I surveyed the cramped room, a fraying floral bedspread, a scuffed desk, and a flickering TV perched on a dresser. It wasn't much, but anonymity was my greatest luxury these days. No credit card records, no paper trail. Just a name I'd invented to sign the register. I'd been on the move for a few days, maybe a week, honestly. It was getting difficult to track. Each morning felt like the same ritual. Wake, pack my single suitcase, drive aimlessly until something in my gut told me to stop for the night. Some days I managed more miles. Other days I'd stall at a diner for hours. The real goal was to leave behind every familiar piece of my old life. If Melanie tried to find me, she'd hit a dead end. Sitting on the edge of the squeaky bed, I flipped open my prepaid phone to see a single text from Marcus. No major updates. Lawyer rumor, Melanie's frantic. Also, someone named Janice is confused about empty accounts. Keep me posted. Janice probably one of Melanie's friends or co-workers. Back when things were normal, I vaguely remembered Melanie mentioning some co-worker by that name who often talked about investments. Now Janice was apparently perplexed by the vanishing money. Maybe Melanie was roping everyone she knew into her meltdown. I pictured them gossiping, scouring social media for clues, calling up the bank only to find a zeroed balance. That mental image brought me grim satisfaction. I tossed the phone onto the nightstand and tried not to think too hard about the betrayal that had started all this. Late at night, images of Melanie with Chase haunted me, swirling in my head like some cheap thriller on replay. During the day, I kept my mind occupied with the mechanics of disappearing. Step by step, I was learning to exist without leaving a trace. Outside, the corridor was deserted, the only sound a distant hum of traffic. I made my way to the motel lobby where a lone attendant scrolled on his phone behind the desk. He barely glanced up when I slid my room key over. "Check out?" he asked in a monotone voice. "Yeah," I replied. "Thanks." I didn't linger. Within minutes, I was back in my car, scanning the horizon. A stretch of farmland lay beyond the highway, dotted with the occasional silo. Where to next? I had no clue, and that was the point. Driving south, I let the rolling fields and the soft country stations on the radio lull me into a half-trance. Occasionally, an 18-wheeler rumbled by, reminding me that I wasn't entirely alone on these roads. Still, compared to the bustle of the city I'd left behind, it felt like a different world. By midday, the sun was relentless. I pulled into a dusty truck stop for gas and a bite to eat. The diner attached to it was an old-fashioned kind of place vinyl seats, a long countertop with swivel stools, walls decorated with vintage signs. I slid into a booth near the back, removed my cap, and tried to appear uninteresting. "Hey there," the waitress greeted. Her name tag read Rhonda, and she looked tired but polite. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee and a sandwich, whatever you've got," I said. My voice sounded rough, like I'd swallowed a handful of gravel overnight. She offered a tight smile and disappeared into the kitchen. I stared at the laminate tabletop, noticing all the nicks and scratches. For a moment, I thought about how Melanie and I used to pick trendy spots for brunch, places with avocado toast and fresh-squeezed juices. We'd laugh about silly stuff, talk about future trips. Now I was alone in a roadside diner, forging a new identity mile by mile. My phone vibrated softly. Another text, probably from Marcus. I took it out and glanced at the screen. "Ethan, you okay? We'll have more doc details soon. Keep phone on." I typed a quick reply. "Still heading south. We'll let you know next stop, thanks." The phone's faint glow reminded me how essential these secret communications had become. Marcus was the only anchor to my old life. Part of me worried about dragging him into this mess, but I needed his expertise. He was the wizard behind the curtain, making sure all the financial maneuvers stayed airtight. Rhonda brought my coffee and sandwich, setting them down gently. "You passing through Orr?" she asked, voice trailing off into a polite question mark. "Yeah, just passing through," I said with a shrug. "Long drive. Needed a rest." She nodded, and that was that. Folks around here seemed to respect privacy more than city dwellers. No one gave me the third degree. I ate in silence, the bland turkey sandwich at least filling my stomach. In the back of my mind, I replayed the phone call Marcus and I had a few days earlier. Melanie had filed a missing person report. The police did a perfunctory check, realized I wasn't exactly in danger, just absent. My old job had apparently tried to reach me, left messages, then gave up. Bank statements showed unusual withdrawals, but no direct theft after all. They were my accounts. The more time passed, the more confident I became that I could stay hidden. But a new part of me stirred, something beyond simple escape. An itching desire to, for lack of a better word, hit back. Melanie wanted half of everything so she could start fresh with Chase. Let's see how well that worked out with no funds to rely on. After finishing lunch, I topped off my gas tank and merged back onto the highway. The farmland scenery eventually shifted into gentle hills. Late afternoon sun made everything glow with a hazy warmth, almost serene. It was hard to believe my entire life had flipped upside down so recently. As evening approached, I found another rundown motel. This one looked even less inviting than the last, but it was cheap and discreet. Perfect. Once inside my room, I took a quick shower to wash off the sweat and dust from the road. Then I sprawled on the bed, phone in hand, deciding whether to call Marcus again. Before I could dial, the phone lit up an incoming call. Restricted number. My pulse spiked. Could it be Melanie? The police? Slowly, I pressed the accept button. A static-laced silence, then a voice. "Ethan?" I exhaled in relief. It was Marcus. "I'm here." "Good. I used a burner line, just in case. Look, so far everything is going smoothly. Your new corporate entity is established. Next step is finalizing those special documents you mentioned. We'll need a bit more time." "That's fine," I said, shifting on the bed. "Any news about the situation?" He sighed. "Melanie's still telling people you just vanished. She's claiming you might have mental health issues, or that you got involved with some bad crowd. The typical rumors. But nothing official. She can't force the police to do more. Also, there's talk she's strapped for cash, blaming you for clearing out funds." A tiny, bitter laugh escaped me. "Blaming me for my own money? Sounds like her." Marcus hesitated. "You sure you want to keep going with this? You could just move forward, file for divorce on your terms, and end it. No need to string her along. Might be easier." That question hung heavy in the stale motel air. Easier, yes. but I wanted to ensure she felt the full brunt of losing everything she took for granted. "Let's just say I'm not done yet," I murmured. "Keep me updated." We exchanged a few more words about the legalities. Then I ended the call and stared at the ceiling. My heart raced from a cocktail of resentment and adrenaline. I'd never seen myself as the vindictive type before, but love and betrayal do strange things to people. Eventually, I fell into a restless sleep, dreams filled with half-remembered images of Melanie in her wedding dress, smiling lovingly at me only for that grin to twist into a mocking sneer. I jolted awake near midnight, the lamp still on, my mouth dry. Checking the door's lock, I double-checked the chain. I couldn't help feeling anxious in these unfamiliar places, as though any shadow in the hallway might be someone looking for me. But no one knocked. No one came. And that was exactly how I needed it to be. The next morning, I got up early, repeated my departure ritual. Another cheap motel, another anonymous checkout. Another long drive ahead with only my thoughts as company. Yet with each mile, I felt a determination solidifying inside me. Melanie might have kicked off this twisted game, but I was the one rewriting the rules. And so far, I was winning. I reached the outskirts of a small town around midday. The sign by the highway read, "Welcome to Aspen Creek, Pop, 3402 E." It was the kind of place you'd pass by without a second thought, but something about the rolling hills and the cluster of old storefronts called to me. Maybe it was the quietness, a refuge from the chaos of big cities. I found a dusty parking spot near the main street, stepping out to stretch my legs. The sun beat down on the cracked sidewalk where a few locals ambled past, nodding politely in greeting. No one gave me a second glance. I liked that. A little diner called Darcy's Eatery caught my eye. The red neon open sign flickered in the window, promising air conditioning and a meal. I pushed the door open, stepping into a cozy space with checkered floors and about a dozen tables. The smell of fried food and brewed coffee curled around me like a friendly hug. I slid into a booth near the back, taking a moment to absorb the scene. A waitress with curly brown hair and a name tag reading Becca came over, offering a menu. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Water's fine," I said softly, scanning the specials board. Burger and fries or fried chicken comfort food, plain and simple. Perfect for a traveler who just wanted to blend in. As I waited, I noticed a middle-aged couple at a nearby table. The man wore worn jeans and a flannel shirt, broad-shouldered like he spent most of his days doing manual labor. The woman across from him was petite, with kind eyes. They conversed in low tones, occasionally casting glances around as though taking stock of the diner. I overheard a snippet. "Still can't find a decent ranch hand? Helen, I'm telling you, we'll manage somehow." My ears perked up at the mention of needing help on a ranch. I tried not to stare, focusing on the menu. But curiosity pulled me in. A ranch job could be exactly what I needed right now. Off the grid, no background checks. Something physical that would keep me from drowning in memories of my old life. Becca returned with my water, and I ordered the burger special. As she walked away, I realized the couple had paused their conversation. The man glanced over and I caught his gaze briefly before looking down. A moment later, I heard a chair scrape. He approached, hat in hand. Up close, I saw a few strands of gray hair peeking out from under a weathered baseball cap. "Pardon me," he said in a polite drawl, "but I noticed you're not from around here. You passing through?" I fought the urge to tense up, reminding myself to stay calm. "Yeah," I answered. "Just driving around, looking for work if I can find any." He exchanged a look with the woman Helen, presumably who had come up behind him. She seemed to measure me with a quick glance. Then the man extended his hand. "Name's William. This is my wife Helen. We've got a ranch a ways out of town. Been short-handed for a while." His directness caught me off guard, but I forced a polite smile and shook his hand. "I'm, Ethan," I said, using my real first name. If they asked for a last name, I'd figure out how to handle that. "I've got some experience with manual labor, though not ranch-specific." Helen's eyes flickered with curiosity. "Where you from, Ethan?" A loaded question, didn't want to mention the city or any specifics. "Traveled a bit recently," I deflected. "I guess you could say I'm between places." William glanced at Helen again, a silent conversation passing between them. Then he cleared his throat. "We got room in a spare cabin on our property, if you're willing to work for it. Not sure how long you'd plan on staying, though." This was almost too convenient. A part of me wondered if I was walking into a setup, but the vibe from them felt genuine. They looked more desperate for help than suspicious of me. "I might be," I answered carefully. "But I'd need to know some details, what kind of work, hours, pay, that sort of thing." Helen offered a small smile. "Why don't you finish your lunch, and we can talk more? We're just about done here ourselves. If you're open to a drive, we'll show you the place." Before I could respond, Becca arrived with my burger and fries, giving us a curious glance. William and Helen thanked her and settled their own bill. I watched them return to their table, quietly discussing something I couldn't hear. Eating my lunch, I felt a swirling mixture of relief and caution. This could be exactly the hiding spot I needed, or it could be a dead end if they were too inquisitive. But after weeks of drifting from motel to motel, the thought of having a place to settle, even temporarily, felt like a lifeline. After I finished the burger, I walked over to their table. William looked up, eyes friendly but probing. "You ready, son?" I nodded, ignoring the pang in my chest at the word son. My father had died years ago, but hearing that paternal tone from a stranger triggered a brief, unexpected sorrow. I cleared my throat. "Sure. Let's go." They led me out to a battered pickup truck parked on the street. Its paint job had long since faded, replaced by rust in spots. Helen hopped in the passenger side, and William gestured for me to sit in the back seat. The interior smelled of hay and well-worn leather. As we pulled out of town, William explained the basics. They owned a modest ranch about 15 minutes down a back road. They kept cattle, grew some feed, and had a couple of outbuildings in need of repair. "We used to have 2 full-time hands," William said, voice tinged with regret. "But times got tough, and we had to let 'em go. Right now, it's just me and Helen plus an old friend named Jonah. We're spread thin." Helen twisted in her seat to face me. "If you're interested in room and board, plus some pay, we could work something out. But we gotta be sure you're reliable." I simply nodded, gazing at the passing fields, my mind churning with cautious optimism. Could I keep my identity under wraps here? If no one asked too many questions, maybe. Eventually, we turned onto a gravel driveway flanked by a weathered wooden arch that read, Beckett Ranch. A modest 2-story farmhouse stood at the end, paint peeling in places but otherwise neat. Next to it was a large barn, and beyond that, rolling pastures dotted with grazing cows. William parked by a side entrance. "This here is it. We'll show you the cabin if you like." Stepping out of the truck, I inhaled the country air. Even with the tang of cow manure drifting by, it felt oddly refreshing, like potential. Helen beckoned me around the side of the main house, where a small gravel path wound toward a standalone cabin with a tin roof. Inside, it was spare but serviceable. A single room with a bed, a table, a small kitchenette, and an attached bathroom. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through a single window. Helen folded her arms, looking at me with a warm but firm expression. "It's no fancy setup. You'd be expected to work sunrise to late afternoon, sometimes more if we have urgent tasks. Pay isn't huge, but it's honest. And you'd have privacy out here." William scratched at his stubble. "We ask folks about references normally, but we're in a bind. If you're a hard worker, that might be enough." I noticed how he carefully didn't ask about my past or family. Maybe he sensed I was running from something, or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, I felt a rush of gratitude. I think I could make this work," I said quietly, scanning the dusty cabin. "How soon can I start?" Helen let out a relieved breath. "Tomorrow morning if you're up for it. We'll let you get settled tonight. We usually eat dinner around 6 o'clock in the main house. You're welcome to join." I glanced around, imagining a life hidden away on these pastures. My heart pounded with a strange mix of hope and lingering caution. "I appreciate it," I said. "Truly." William offered a nod. Then it settled. I set my suitcase by the rickety bed. As they left me to get comfortable, I exhaled a long, shaky breath. This was unexpected, yet it felt like a stroke of luck, the perfect shadow to hide in. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that I might be safe long enough to finish my revenge plans in silence. The cabin smelled like old wood and stale air, but after a quick sweep and a bit of freshening up, it started to feel livable. Evening light slanted through the small window, casting warm stripes across the floorboards. I could hear faint clanging from the main house, probably Helen preparing dinner. I checked my phone, the prepaid one I'd been using to communicate with Marcus. No new messages yet. Lowering myself onto the bed, I mulled over what to do next about Melanie. According to Marcus, she'd filed a missing person report, but local authorities wouldn't launch a large-scale hunt for a grown man who left voluntarily. She must have realized by now I'd drained our accounts. Part of me wished I could see her face when she discovered the financial well was Bondry. Still, I wasn't entirely satisfied. Yes, I was hidden, and yes, her cash flow had been severed. But the part of me that had nursed anger and humiliation wanted more. I wanted her to face the consequences of her betrayal in a tangible way. A soft chime alerted me to an incoming text. "Melanie's lawyer left a voicemail at my office," Marcus wrote. "They're fishing for your location. I've said nothing. Also, rumor is Janice has been in touch with them. Could be she's helping Melanie." Janice again. I let out a slow breath. If Janice was feeding intel to Melanie, they might attempt legal angles, maybe push for spousal support, or claim I'd abandoned the marriage illegally. But without a confirmed address, it would be hard to serve me any papers. I typed a quick response. "Let them keep fishing. We're not done yet. Finalize the doc prep for the eventual divorce on our terms." I left it at that. My heart hammered with a mix of anticipation and dread. Eventually, I needed to confront this legally, but not until everything was stacked in my favor. If I truly wanted to see Melanie suffer the consequences of her own greed, I couldn't rush it. A knock on the cabin's door startled me out of my thoughts. I pocketed the phone and opened up to see William standing there, hat in hand. "Dinner's ready if you're hungry," he said in his laid-back drawl. Nodding, I grabbed my keys. "Yeah, thanks. I'll be right over." In the main house, the dining area was modest, an old wooden table that looked homemade, with mismatched chairs. Helen had laid out plates of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. My stomach rumbled in response. I realized I hadn't eaten since midday at the diner. We sat down, joined by a tall, wiry man in his 50s who introduced himself as Jonah. He had calloused hands and a sun-weathered face, the kind of person who'd spent a lifetime working outdoors. Conversation was simple and cordial. Helen asked me where I'd learned about manual labor. I told her the truth. In broad strokes, I'd done some seasonal jobs during college, minor farm tasks in my teenage years, that kind of thing. I omitted any mention of my corporate job or city life. They didn't push for details, which I appreciated. "You show up early tomorrow," Jonah said through a mouthful of chicken. "We'll start with feeding and watering the livestock, then maybe get to mending some fences." I gave a small nod. "Sounds good." William offered me a wry smile. "Hope you're not afraid of getting your hands dirty. Ranch life is tough." I managed a half chuckle, mindful of the fact that I'd been living in a cushy townhouse not so long ago. Trust me, I'm ready for a change. The rest of the meal passed with light conversation about the ranch, the local town, and mild complaints about the heat. It felt normal, a slice of ordinary life that I hadn't experienced since everything blew up with Melanie. For a fleeting moment, the tension in my chest loosened, replaced by a quiet sense of belonging. After dinner, Helen insisted I take some leftovers back to the cabin. I thanked her, feeling a bit of guilt creeping in. They were being generous and welcoming, but I was here under a false pretense, hiding from a wife who thought I was missing. The thought lingered as I walked back to my cabin under the star-studded sky. I tried to shake off the guilt. This was survival, I told myself. Melanie had made her bed when she betrayed me. No sense feeling sorry about people I'd only just met. Still, my mind was uneasy as I settled into the cabin. Later, the phone buzzed again, a single text from Marcus. "Heads up. Lawyers threatening to press charges if you don't appear soon, possibly claiming financial abuse. Keep a low profile." My lips curled into a faint sneer. Financial abuse. It was my money. If they thought they could force me out of hiding with threats, they clearly underestimated my resolve. If anything, it reaffirmed that I had to stay hidden until the legal puzzle was set in my favor. Flopping onto the bed, I scrolled through a few offline documents I'd saved. Each one detailed potential legal defenses, ways to dispute community property claims, and how to countersue for adultery in certain jurisdictions. This was the path I'd chosen: cold, calculated, and methodical. I flicked off the overhead light, letting darkness enfold me. The ranch was eerily quiet, just the chirp of crickets outside the window. Thoughts of Melanie still crept in, but exhaustion from the day's travel soon pulled me under. When morning arrived, dawn broke in a spill of orange light across the cabin floor. I rose quickly, adrenaline pumping at the idea of my first real day on the ranch. Jonah was already waiting by the barn, showing me how to measure feed for the cattle. The animals loomed large, their breath misting in the early chill, but I handled each task with an odd sense of purpose. Doing physical work pushed Melanie out of my mind, at least for a few hours. We spent the day hauling bales of hay, moving them with a small tractor, then moved on to fence repairs. Jonah demonstrated how to replace rotted fence posts, hammer in new nails, and check for signs of damage. Sweat drenched my shirt, my muscles ached, but it felt good, like I was grounding myself in something real. Around lunchtime, William and Helen drove out with sandwiches and cold drinks. The four of us ate under the shade of a large oak tree. I listened to them banter about the ranch's finances and how they hoped to expand once they found a reliable buyer for some of their older livestock. I asked polite questions, careful not to reveal my own background in finance. By late afternoon, Jonah and I finished a small section of fence. He clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good today. Not everyone has the stamina for ranch work." I managed a tight grin. "Thanks. It's refreshing to do something handsome." He nodded, lighting a cigarette. "Real life out here, that's for sure. None of that city hustle. By the way," he added, exhaling smoke into the crisp air, "William said to remind you, dinner's the same time as yesterday if you want it, or you can do your own thing." I told him I'd be there. Something about mealtime in the farmhouse felt comforting, maybe because it reminded me of a family dynamic I'd lost years ago. That evening, after another hearty meal, I returned to my cabin. My body was sore, but my mind was sharper than ever. I grabbed my phone to check in with Marcus. Sure enough, he'd left a voicemail on the encrypted app we used. In it, he detailed more about Melanie's lawyer's threats and how certain documents were nearly ready. I felt that familiar swirl of anger. So Melanie was turning up the heat, trying to claim I was withholding marital assets. Good luck with that. Once everything was in place, I'd show her who was truly in control. For now, I typed a quick text back. "Maintain radio silence. I'll reach out soon." With that done, I let the phone drop onto the small wooden table. My gaze flickered around the modest cabin. Outside, the ranch lay quiet under a sky full of stars. I inhaled deeply, letting the clean air fill my lungs. Hiding here was a strategic move, but I was starting to sense a strange peace in it, too. Soon enough, though, I'd be forced to update my plan further. If Melanie and her lawyer kept pushing, I might have to lay down my terms faster than anticipated. Either way, I was ready. Tomorrow would bring another round of chores, another chance to keep my head down. But behind that rural routine, I'd stay vigilant, crafting the next phase of my revenge with slow, deliberate care. A week slipped by at Beckett Ranch faster than I would have imagined. Each morning, I woke to the tinny buzz of my phone's alarm at the crack of dawn. Jonah and I trudged through chores, feeding cattle, cleaning stalls, and loading supply trucks until midday. The afternoons often saw us riding out to mend fences or check on water lines for the livestock. It was tough work that left my hands calloused and my muscles aching. Yet in this slow, repetitive grind, I found a peculiar sense of comfort. When you're hauling hay bales or hammering nails under the scorching sun, there's little room for replaying old betrayals in your head. My mind could go blissfully quiet for hours. The ranch itself was modest but well kept. William and Helen clearly poured their hearts into it, though from stray comments, I gleaned they were stretched thin financially. They talked about struggling in recent years' drought conditions, market fluctuations for beef, the departure of their former ranch hands. I stayed polite, not offering my own background. They accepted my silence with an easy grace. Jonah showed me how to handle the horses one morning. We saddled up two calm mares, riding them around the corral so I could get a feel for it. I wasn't a total novice, but I hadn't been in the saddle for years. Once I got the hang of it again, Jonah gave me a rare grin. "Not bad, city boy," he teased. "You might actually fit in if you keep at it." I laughed, something that felt foreign in my chest but surprisingly freeing. "I'll do my best not to fall off." In the evenings, Helen insisted I join them for dinner, at least most nights. There was always simple, hearty food stews, roast meats, vegetables from a small garden behind the house. The conversation was warm, yet never prying. William cracked the occasional dry joke, and Jonah would grunt in response. It felt domestic. One afternoon, I was alone by the barn organizing tools when my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. I glanced around to make sure Jonah wasn't nearby, then opened it. "Major update. Melanie is in full panic mode. Her ex, Chase, apparently backed off once he realized the money's gone. She's left with bills. Lawyer demands a meeting or they threaten more legal action." My heart pounded as I read. So the affair had collapsed the moment funds ran dry. Some poetic justice, indeed. I could almost see Melanie's face twisted in confusion, maybe rage, as she realized her new boyfriend wasn't sticking around. A part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt a strange sorrow for the life we once shared, but that pang was fleeting. I typed a reply. "Keep stalling them. Don't reveal location. Our docs are almost ready, right?" Within minutes, Marcus responded, "Yes, finalizing soon. Stay hidden." I tucked the phone away, chest tight with a mixture of triumph and tension. This was what I wanted, right? Melanie alone, strapped for cash with no easy way out. If guilt nagged at me, I reminded myself she started this by betraying me and plotting to claim half my assets. No, I had every right to protect myself and maybe teach her a lesson. Later that day, Helen asked me to help fix a broken latch on the chicken coop. As I kneeled in the dirt, fiddling with rusted screws, a gentle breeze stirred the dry grass around us. She stood nearby, offering me tools as needed. "You've been a godsend, Ethan," she said, her tone quiet. "We really appreciate all your work. Don't know how we managed before you showed up." I forced a modest smile, focusing on the latch so I wouldn't have to meet her gaze. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," I replied honestly. The ranch had saved me from a rootless existence, at least for the time being. "William mentioned maybe giving you a small raise if you stick around," she added. "Would that interest you? Would it?" A part of me was starting to envision staying longer, but I also knew I had unfinished business in the city, so I hedged my answer. "It might. Let's see how things go." She nodded, respecting my vagueness. "Well, just know we're happy to have you." With that, she excused herself to check on something in the house, leaving me to my thoughts. By the time dusk approached, I'd put away the tools and fed the chickens. Jonah had finished a round of repairs on the tractor, and William was off doing a final check on the cattle. I took a moment to walk down the dirt road leading toward the main gate. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rolling fields, painting everything in hues of orange and pink. Standing there, I couldn't help marveling at the contrast between my current life and the one I'd fled. Here I had no ties, no drama, just a daily grind and a roof over my head. Meanwhile, Melanie was presumably frantic, and Chase had bailed on her. That knowledge gave me a grim sense of triumph. As the crickets began their evening chorus, I headed back to my cabin. There, on the rickety table, my phone glowed with another text. "Melanie's contacting your old workplace, demanding info. They have none. She's talking about hiring a private investigator." I smirked at the screen. Let her try. She wouldn't find a trace of me out here, especially with all the financial documents hidden behind corporate entities and shell accounts. By the time she realized how thoroughly I'd covered my tracks, I'd be ready to confront her on my terms. I typed a response to Marcus. "Let me know if any actual PI gets close. Otherwise, I'm staying put." Hitting send, I felt a wave of relief. If she truly spent money on a PI, that would only speed up her financial ruin. Perhaps I was being cruel, but memories of overhearing that conversation, her laughter with Nicole about a new life with Chase, half my assets fueling their fresh start, kept me resolute. Collapsing onto the bed, I let the day's exhaustion wash over me. My arms ached, my fingers throbbed from gripping tools. But inside, I felt oddly alive. like I was reasserting control over my destiny. Ranch life might be rugged, but it was grounding in a way I never expected. That night, a light rain pattered on the cabin's tin roof. I lay awake, listening to the gentle drumming, mind wandering. Eventually, the steady rhythm soothed me. Just as my eyelids grew heavy, my phone buzzed one last time. "Good news," Marcus wrote. "Doc prep finished. We can push for your divorce on your terms soon. Melanie's meltdown confirmed." I stared at the message, a swirl of emotion tightening my chest. Anger, satisfaction, regret. Then I powered off the phone. Tomorrow at dawn, I'd be up feeding cattle again. Another day in this surprising new life. But behind every chore and every quiet dinner, my plan edged closer to completion. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness claim me. One thing was certain. Melanie was realizing that her betrayal had consequences, and I wasn't done making her understand just how costly they could be. If someone had told me a month ago that I'd be content waking up at the crack of dawn to scoop horse stalls, I would have laughed in their face. But there I was, 5 in the morning, stepping out of my little cabin at Beckett Ranch with a thermos of coffee, bracing myself against the crisp, early breeze. The sky still wore a faint purple hue, and most of the world seemed asleep. Jonah was already at the barn, leaning against a post with a half-finished cigarette. He raised his chin in greeting. We didn't talk much unless it concerned the day's chores. That unspoken understanding suited me fine. I needed the quiet. We started with feeding the horses and checking their hooves. Jonah tossed me a nudge of encouragement here and there, guiding me on better ways to hold the animal's legs or how to spot early signs of strain. He was patient, but firm, never one for wasted words. I appreciated that. William appeared a bit later, leading a sorrel mare by the reins. "Morning, Ethan," he called, tipping his hat. There was a warmth to his voice I'd begun to expect every day. Compared to Melanie's superficial small talk about brunch spots or brand-name handbags, William's sincerity felt refreshing. He had no hidden agenda, no pretense. We tackled the next tasks systematically, hauling hay bales onto the pickup, refreshing water troughs, walking the fence line near the corral to ensure no loose boards might cause injuries. As we worked, I thought about how drastically my life had shifted. Just weeks prior, I was holed up in cheap motels, meticulously wiping my trail. Now I was learning to tie square knots and eye-bolt knots, my shirt slick with sweat by 8 in the morning. Eventually, Helen brought out a jug of lemonade and some sandwiches, smiling in her gentle way. "You've done wonders around here," she told me, pressing the jug into my hands. "I don't know how we managed before you," Jonah snorted. "We managed fine, but now it's less likely I'll keel over from exhaustion," he said, though his gruff tone carried a hint of humor. I smirked, taking a grateful swig of lemonade. Already my shoulders and back ached from the relentless manual work. But in that pain, I found a sort of dignity, a raw honesty that everyday office life never gave me. I used to be a guy who navigated spreadsheets and email threads, who had to stomach corporate politics. Now I hammered fences under the sun, my thoughts drifting only to the next physical task. In quieter moments, though, memories of Melanie and her betrayal seeped back in. A few nights ago, I'd dreamed of finding her and that guy Chase in my old bedroom mocking me. I'd woken drenched in sweat, half ready to drive back and confront them. But then I reminded myself, I have a plan. The ranch had become a sanctuary to keep me hidden until I could finalize that plan on my terms. When midday arrived, Jonah and I hopped into William's old pickup and rattled down the gravel road to pick up some supplies from a feed store on the edge of town. During the ride, Jonah flicked the radio to a country station. A twangy tune about heartbreak and dusty roads played softly. He turned it down and glanced over at me. "So, you staying a while longer?" he asked without preamble. "William thinks you might be." I shifted, uncertain how much to divulge. "For now, yeah," I answered. "I like it here." He nodded once, as though that answered everything. We reached the feed store, an old tin-roofed building that smelled of fertilizer and alfalfa. The graying proprietor, Mr. Granger, greeted Jonah by name. I stayed in the background, letting Jonah handle the purchase of sacks of grain and a new spool of fence wire. On the drive back, I stared out the window at the rolling fields, letting the hum of the engine settle over me. It was surprising how comfortable I felt with these people, given how suspicious I was of everyone else. William, Helen, and Jonah never pushed me about my past, never asked why I'd drifted into town. Perhaps they sensed I carried secrets, or maybe country folk just minded their own business. That evening, after dinner at the main house, I lingered on the porch steps while Jonah and William discussed next week's tasks. Helen bustled in and out of the kitchen, occasionally refilling glasses. The sky above was painted in dusty pink and orange. Crickets chirped in the distance, a slow, easy concert. I couldn't help comparing this quiet domestic scene to how life with Melanie had been. She'd often complain about our small townhouse, wanting to upgrade to something bigger, something showier. And I'd bend over backward trying to keep her happy. Now I realized how all that extravagance had masked a deep hollowness. "Ethan, you okay?" Helen's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She stood by the screen door, a look of gentle concern on her face. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said softly. "Just enjoying the sunset." She nodded, smiling kindly. "All right. You let us know if you need anything. We're heading to bed soon." I returned to my cabin under a sky full of stars, the day's labor weighing pleasantly on my limbs. My phone, still that burner I used, lay on the rickety table. No messages from Marcus tonight. Part of me was relieved. No news meant no immediate crisis, no sudden shift in my carefully orchestrated disappearance. Slumping onto the bed, I rubbed my sore neck. Life had become a paradox, physically draining yet mentally quiet. And for the first time since I left Melanie, I felt a small flicker of hope that maybe I could rebuild something real, something better, once I exacted the revenge she so richly deserved. Tomorrow I'd do it all again. Feed horses, fix fences, sweat under the sun. But each day I settled a little deeper into the ranch routine, letting the open land and honest work soothe the wounds of betrayal. By the second week, I could handle most morning chores without Jonah double-checking my every move. I'd rise early, head to the barn, and handle feeding the horses on my own. William seemed pleasantly surprised by how quickly I'd adapted. I overheard him telling Helen, "Man picks things up fast," as he sipped his coffee one morning. I admit I liked hearing that. For too long I'd felt like a fool, blindsided by Melanie's deceit. At least here I was proving myself in a setting that demanded real effort. One hot afternoon I was mending a damaged fence post along the ranch's southern boundary. The sun blazed overhead, sweat trickling down my temple as I hammered new nails. I was halfway done when I heard the rumble of a truck engine approaching. Expecting William or Jonah, I glanced up from my crouched position. Instead, a sleek, newer model pickup rolled to a stop on the dusty path, engine purring like a cat. Out stepped a young woman, maybe mid-20s, wearing jeans, boots, and a plaid shirt that looked both practical and stylish. Her hair was a deep auburn, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp, inquisitive eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, not unkindly, but definitely direct. I stood up, wiping my forehead with my sleeve. "Ethan," I replied. "I work for William and Helen now. They didn't mention anyone stopping by." A subtle smirk tugged at her lips. "Well, it's my ranch too, sort of. I'm Aubrey." Ah, Aubrey, William and Helen's daughter. I recalled hearing her name in passing, something about her being away at veterinary school. I stuck out my hand, slightly unsure if she'd accept it. "Nice to meet you." She eyed my hand a second before shaking it. Her grip was firm, no nonsense. "Didn't know my folks hired someone new," she said, sliding her sunglasses into her shirt pocket. "They said they were short on help, but I figured they'd wait until I got back." "Well, guess they didn't. I've been here a couple of weeks," I answered. Her stare was unapologetically bold, as if she was sizing me up. That's when William's old truck rattled down the path, dust pluming behind it. He pulled up next to Aubrey's vehicle, stepping out with a big grin. "Aubrey, you're early," he exclaimed, enveloping her in a hug that she only halfway pretended to resist. "You told me I could drop in any time," she retorted, though there was a twinkle in her eyes. She cast me a sideways glance. "So Ethan, here's the new ranch hand?" William nodded. "He is. Hard worker, too. This place would have run me ragged if not for him." I felt my ears warm under the faint praise. Aubrey folded her arms, leaning against her truck's door. "Seems you've been busy," she remarked, as though deciding whether that was a compliment or a threat. Her demeanor put me on edge. She radiated confidence, the kind that comes from years of being the prized daughter in a tight-knit family. And sure, I was a stranger. Maybe she had every right to be protective. Eventually, William suggested we return to the main house for a late lunch. Aubrey hopped back into her truck, and I climbed into the passenger seat of William's. As we drove, he explained in low tones that Aubrey had graduated early from her veterinary program, surprising them. She was supposed to come back in a couple of weeks, but apparently she had decided to show up sooner. As we entered the farmhouse kitchen, Helen bustled around excitedly, setting out plates and fussing over her daughter's arrival. Aubrey cast me a brief, unreadable glance, but otherwise seemed absorbed in hugging her mom and discussing her drive. Jonah ambled in, greeted Aubrey with a polite tip of his hat, then lingered by the back door, listening. Meanwhile, I tried to fade into the background until Helen insisted I sit down and eat. Lunch was simple grilled chicken, a big bowl of potato salad, fresh lemonade. Aubrey peppered her parents with questions about ranch finances, expansions, and some local farmland gossip. When her gaze flicked to me, it felt like a challenge. She asked, "So, Ethan, how'd you end up here?" I forced a neutral shrug. "I was passing through, looking for work. Your dad offered me a spot." She raised an eyebrow. "And you decided to stay in the middle of nowhere just like that?" Helen cleared her throat, throwing her daughter a gently admonishing look. "Aubrey," I set down my fork carefully. "I needed a change. The city wasn't suiting me anymore." I left it at that. Aubrey studied me a second longer, then shrugged as if satisfied she'd done her due diligence. Still, I could sense the undercurrent of suspicion. Later that day, once I'd returned to fence mending, Aubrey approached me again, alone this time. She leaned on the post I was working on, arms crossed. "Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk," she said softly, the earlier sharpness in her tone mellowing a bit. "I just worry about my parents. People take advantage sometimes, especially when money's tight." I paused my hammering. "I get it," I replied, meeting her gaze. "They've been good to me. I wouldn't do anything to hurt them." A half smile flickered across her face. "I hope so. They deserve good people in their corner." Without waiting for a response, she pivoted and walked off toward the barn, leaving me with a swirl of conflicting emotions. Mild annoyance at her interrogation, but also a grudging respect for how fiercely she seemed to care about William and Helen. That evening, we all ended up around the dinner table again. Aubrey recounted stories from her vet rotations, funny tales about small-town clients who treated their animals like children, and more somber ones about livestock diseases that ran rampant if unchecked. Despite our initial friction, I found myself intrigued by how passionate she was about helping animals. Over dessert, some kind of berry cobbler Helen had whipped up Aubrey brought up local ranch politics. She rattled off names of neighboring ranch owners, discussing who was reputable and who might be teetering on shady practices. That's when I first heard the name Hartley. "Oh yeah," Aubrey said between bites. "Hartley Ranch has been expanding. They bought out 2 smaller places last year. I heard rumors they forced one older couple into selling." William nodded grimly. "Hartley's got deep pockets. People around here say he doesn't mind using strong-arm tactics to get what he wants." Helen sighed. "He's tried approaching us a few times, but we can't—" She cut herself off, glancing at me and then at Jonah. "Anyway, we're holding on as best we can." From the shadows near the doorway, Jonah muttered, "He's trouble. Best keep your eyes open." The conversation moved on, but the tension around Hartley's name remained palpable. I stored that detail away, a prickle of curiosity stirring at the edges of my mind. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself in the barn, refilling a feed bin. Aubrey wandered in, her boots echoing against the concrete floor. She ran a hand over the nose of a dapple-gray horse, her expression oddly tender. "That stuff about Hartley is real," she said, not looking at me. "He's known to bully smaller ranches. Dad's lucky he hasn't tried harder here, but maybe it's a matter of time." I studied her profile in the dim light, noticing the flicker of worry in her eyes. "If he does, I'm sure William and Jonah can handle it," I offered, keeping my voice low. She finally turned toward me. You say that, but you haven't seen how far some folks will go in this business. She paused, then gave a tight shrug. Anyway, keep it in mind. I nodded, sensing an unspoken warning in her words. A subtle tension hummed between us, a mix of caution and something else I couldn't quite name. She left a moment later, her footsteps trailing off into the darkness. Standing alone in the barn, I released a slow breath. Meeting Aubrey was like encountering a gust of wind that rattles everything in its path. She was strong, assertive, and protective qualities I hadn't expected. And as much as I wanted to remain invisible, I had a feeling she'd keep me on my toes. Still, a part of me welcomed the distraction from old ghosts. If Hartley truly posed a threat, then maybe, ironically, I could put my own cunning to good use. After all, protecting the people who'd sheltered me might be the least I could do. The next few days brought a sense of unease to Beckett Ranch. It started with little things, a few missing calves that Jonah initially chalked up to strays wandering off. But then more subtle signs cropped up: wire fences cut in suspiciously straight lines, footprints left in the mud near gates that were supposed to be locked. William tried to keep calm, but I saw the worry etching deeper lines on his forehead. Over dinner one evening, he announced he'd be riding out more frequently, checking the perimeter of the ranch. Jonah offered to go with him. Helen pursed her lips, eyes flicking to Aubrey. "We should probably let the sheriff know," she suggested, voice carefully measured. Jonah scratched at his stubble. "Sheriff might say we got no proof it's Hartley or anyone else. Could just be random troublemakers." Aubrey shook her head, crossing her arms. "It's not random. I've heard talk in town that Hartley's been eyeing the Beckett place for years, figuring we're on shaky ground. What better way to pressure us than sabotage?" I sat quietly, absorbing their conversation. My mind reeled back to everything I'd learned from my own conflict with Melanie. Sometimes you can't rely on the law to protect you. Sometimes you have to gather your own evidence. Late that night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin walls felt too close, the darkness too silent. I stepped outside, phone in hand, scanning the star-strewn sky. A memory of rummaging through spreadsheets and account logs to uncover Melanie's secrets flickered through my thoughts. If I could handle that, maybe I could apply the same meticulous mindset to protecting this ranch. The next morning, I approached William and Jonah as we saddled up for a perimeter check. "Mind if I join the patrol?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "I've got decent eyes for detail." William exchanged a glance with Jonah, then nodded. "Sure. Can't hurt to have an extra set of hands." So the three of us rode out, each on our own horse. The day was bright, the sun climbing high as we cut across pasture land and skirted the tree line. Every so often, Jonah or William would point out places where they'd found signs of tampering loose boards, partial wire cuts. I took mental note of each location, storing them away for later analysis. During a break near a small creek, I dismounted and crouched beside the water. Jonah scanned the horizon while William watered his horse. My gaze landed on a patch of trampled grass leading into the brush. "What's over that way?" I asked, nodding to the brush. William followed my line of sight. "Just more grazing land. We rarely run the herd that far." Jonah's brow furrowed. "Still, that grass looks fresh stomped. Could be wildlife, but I'm not sure." Curiosity gnawed at me. I approached the brush, carefully pushing aside tall weeds. Sure enough, I spotted footprints, large boot prints, the pattern too neat to be random scuffles. My pulse quickened. "Somebody's been through here," I murmured, straightening up. "More than once, I'd guess." William's jaw tightened. "All the more reason to talk to the sheriff. But we both know he won't do much without solid evidence." That evening, I decided to set up a simple system, nothing fancy. Just a few markers and a notepad to track suspicious spots. If fences got tampered with again, we'd note the date, time, and location. Maybe I'd even rig up an old trail camera or two, if Jonah or William had some stashed away. Aubrey caught me scribbling notes on a scrap of paper in the barn. She raised an eyebrow. "Doing detective work?" I shrugged, my voice hushed in the twilight. "I guess. If someone's messing with the ranch, we need proof." She studied me, her gaze keen. "You know, you surprise me, Ethan. Most ranch hands just do their job and move on." I felt a pang of old defensiveness surge up, reminding me of how Melanie once questioned my ability to handle life's challenges. "I owe your folks for taking me in," I said, a bit gruffer than I intended. "If I can help, I will." A flicker of respect lit her eyes. "All right, detective. Let me know if you need any help." She left with a half-smile, footsteps echoing on the barn's concrete floor. The next few days followed a tense pattern. We'd go about our usual work feeding, fence mending, herding, but always on alert for signs of sabotage. Jonah and I set up a couple of old trail cameras in spots we suspected might be targets. I got them from the back of the equipment shed, half buried under tarps. In the afternoons, William and Aubrey pored over finances, sometimes arguing in hushed tones. I caught snatches of conversation about loan payments and increasing overhead. Though she tried to hide it, Aubrey's anxious worry was clear. The ranch's margins were razor-thin, so any sabotage causing lost cattle or damage could push them closer to a breaking point. At dinner one night, Helen gently steered the conversation away from doom and gloom. She asked about everyone's day. Jonah grunted about a stubborn tractor belt, and I mentioned how one of the young horses finally let me ride without fuss. Aubrey described a trip to a neighboring ranch where she vaccinated a handful of calves. But the subtext remained. We were all on edge, waiting for the next incident. In the back of my mind, I realized how easily Hartley might exploit the ranch's vulnerabilities if he was indeed behind the sabotage. Missing calves, broken fences, small things that added up over time, wearing down William's resources and morale. One late afternoon, I was out by the eastern boundary line, adjusting a camera's angle, when Aubrey rode up on a bay mare. She dismounted and ran a hand through her hair, exhaling heavily. "Heard anything new?" she asked, nodding at the camera. "Not yet," I replied, wiping dust off the device's casing. "Just trying to cover more ground. I figure if we catch even a glimpse of who's trespassing, it could be enough for the sheriff to take it seriously." She gazed across the rolling pasture. "Dad used to say that the land here has a rhythm like a heartbeat. When something's wrong, you can feel it." Her words resonated in a strange way. I thought of how I'd felt the same sense of foreboding back in my old life when I first suspected Melanie of hiding secrets, like a shifting balance you can't quite name. Aubrey shifted closer, lowering her voice. "It's not just about finances. This ranch was my grandfather's, then passed to Dad. If Hartley tries to tear it apart, I don't know how we'll keep going." She paused, as if uncomfortable with the admission of vulnerability. "But I plan to fight." My throat tightened at the determined edge in her voice. If anyone understood desperation to protect something you care about, it was me. "We'll figure it out," I said quietly, surprising myself with the confidence in my tone. "You've got me, Jonah. Your folks, even these cameras. Hartley doesn't stand a chance if he's behind this." She glanced at me, something unspoken passing between us, a shared recognition of how far we might go for this ranch. Then she nodded, swinging back onto her mare. "All right. Let's hope you're right." As she rode off, I felt an odd warmth beneath my ribs. It was a shift, like we weren't just wary strangers anymore. Maybe we were on the same side, working together to protect William and Helen's livelihood. Before sundown, I rechecked the fence lines one last time. Sure enough, near the creek, I found fresh footprints again. I knelt, comparing them mentally to the old prints. The pattern looked similar, a wide sole, possibly steel-toed boots. My suspicions spiked. Someone was methodically circling the ranch, testing for weaknesses. I took a photo on my phone for reference, making sure the flash was off so I didn't draw attention. The daylight was dim, but hopefully it was enough to capture details. Then I hurried back, determined to show Jonah and William. Back at the barn, I found Jonah stowing away tools. He squinted at the photo, let out a low whistle. "Looks like we got ourselves a new nightly hobby patrolling in shifts," he muttered. William agreed when we brought it up at dinner, though Helen worried about safety. Aubrey insisted she'd take a shift too, refusing to be sidelined. There was no direct proof tying any of this to Hartley, but the tension felt like a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap at any moment. And in the corners of my mind, a familiar calculation churned like back when I'd carefully orchestrated my disappearance from Melanie. If we gathered enough evidence, we'd have leverage. Without it, we were just paranoid. Exhausted but resolute, I headed back to my cabin. The ranch air was still, the night sky peppered with stars. I couldn't shake the sense that we were up against something bigger than just sneaky trespassers. As I shut the cabin door, that name, Hartley, echoed in my head like a warning, a shadowy figure looming over everything we'd worked for. I lay awake for hours, listening to the distant lowing of cattle, replaying each sign of sabotage in my mind. If this was how Hartley operated, he'd keep escalating, testing our defenses, wearing us down. But if there was one thing I'd learned from Melanie's betrayal, it was how to fight back meticulously. Let him try. I might be a stranger to ranch life, but cunning was a skill set I knew too well. Our new nightly patrol routine kicked off the next evening. Jonah took the first shift, riding out with a flashlight and an old rifle, just in case. I took the second shift from midnight to around 3 a.m. but found nothing out of the ordinary. Aubrey covered the pre-dawn hours. No one saw anything suspicious, though we knew that didn't necessarily mean the threat had faded. A few days later, William suggested I ride up to a remote section of the ranch near the western tree line. Some of the cattle occasionally wandered that way, and he wanted an updated head count. By mid-afternoon, I saddled a chestnut mare and set off alone, the sun beating down from a cloudless sky. The ride was peaceful at first, lush grass underfoot, a gentle breeze stirring the tall pines. But as I approached a ridge that dropped down to a secluded waterfall, I noticed fresh hoof prints that didn't match any we had from the ranch. My pulse kicked up. Could someone be trailing our herd? I tethered the mare to a low branch and inched closer on foot. The waterfall was tucked away in a rocky crevice, a hidden gem we rarely had reason to visit. Water cascaded into a clear pool, the spray catching sunlight in a haze of mist. It was beautiful, a perfect spot for a quiet break if you didn't suspect strangers prowling around. Movement caught my eye, silhouettes through the foliage. Two men, dressed in rough jeans and boots, stood near the edge of the pool. They had an air of tension about them, like they were waiting for someone or something. Quietly, I crouched behind a clump of shrubbery, heart pounding. Were they rustlers? Then, to my shock, I spotted a third figure, a woman stepping toward the water's edge. My breath caught in my throat. It was Aubrey. She wore a simple tank top and shorts, hair braided loosely. Must have come here to cool off, or maybe to enjoy a rare moment of tranquility. But she hadn't noticed the men yet. Her focus was on dipping her feet in the water. My stomach flipped. If these men were part of Hartley's crew or some opportunistic thieves, they could corner her easily. I glanced around for any sign of a weapon. I only had a revolver Jonah insisted I carry, tucked into the saddlebag. The men seemed more interested in whispering among themselves, as if deliberating how to proceed. I had seconds to decide. Fumbling for a small rock, I tossed it down the slope, hoping to draw Aubrey's attention without giving away my position. The rock tumbled, clattering against the stones. Aubrey's head jerked up. She spotted the men just as they began advancing toward her. A jolt of protective anger surged through me. In one fluid motion, I dashed back to my mare, grabbing the revolver from the saddlebag. My heart thundered. This was no time for half measures. By the time I returned to the ridge, the men were maybe 20 yards from Aubrey. She'd stepped back into the shallows, looking for an escape route. Her face was set in fierce defiance, but I could see real fear in her eyes. I exhaled, steadying my aim, and fired a single warning shot into the ground not far from the intruder's feet. The crack of the gun echoed off the rocks, birds scattering from the treetops. "Back off!" I shouted, my voice hitting a raw, furious note I hadn't heard in myself before. The men froze, turning to face me. One of them had a pistol at his belt. He reached for it reflexively, but I cocked my revolver again, aiming it square at him. "Don't!" I warned, voice trembling with adrenaline. A tense standoff ensued. Aubrey took the opportunity to scramble up the rocks, edging closer to my position. The second man muttered something, and the first glared at me, hand still hovering near his weapon. "That's enough," I hissed. "Get out of here, now!" After a moment that felt like an eternity, they backed away. Grumbling curses under their breath, they retreated into the undergrowth, heading in the direction of the ridge's far slope. I didn't dare lower the gun until they vanished behind the tree line. Breath ragged, I turned to Aubrey. She stood a few paces away, arms crossed over her chest, water dripping from her shorts, her expression hovering between anger and relief. You always carry a gun on your rides? She managed, voice shaky. Jonah's orders, I panted, taking a step closer. Are you all right? She nodded, jaw clenched. Just spooked. I didn't think anyone came up here. Her gaze flicked to where the men had vanished. Who the hell were they? I don't know, I answered, but they sure weren't casual hikers. I walked her up the ridge, scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of lingering threats. The adrenaline still pulsed through my veins, making my hands tremble slightly. When we reached my horse, Aubrey leaned against a tree, catching her breath. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders now, stray water droplets glistening on her skin. I realized how close a call this had been. If I'd arrived a minute later, I forced the thought aside. Thank you, she said at last, voice quiet. I didn't see them until it was almost too late. No need to thank me, I replied. Just glad I got here in time. She closed her eyes briefly, collecting herself. Then she pulled her phone from a small pouch at her waist, checking for a signal. I'll call Dad once we're a bit farther out. Reception here is non-existent. Nodding, I helped her mount my mare. We can both ride back to the ranch. You can take the saddle, I'll walk. She seemed about to protest, but her shaky hands gave her away. Reluctantly, she nodded. All right, but you owe me a horse next time. A faint laugh escaped me, a release of pent-up tension. Deal. Leading the horse carefully down the wooded path, I kept my revolver in hand, eyes roving. The memory of the men's glare burned in my mind. Whether they were Hartley's goons or just local troublemakers, they had a brazen confidence that worried me. When we emerged from the trees and crossed into open pasture, Aubrey managed a call to William, her voice terse as she relayed what happened. He asked if we were safe, insisted we get back right away. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the ranch. By the time we reached the main house, Jonah was out front, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon. William paced by the porch, clearly agitated. Aubrey slid off the horse, nearly stumbling. William caught her in a fierce hug, bombarding her with questions. Jonah eyed my revolver, then gave me a curt nod of respect. Helen rushed out, wide-eyed, trying to assess if anyone was hurt. In the chaos, I could only offer a broken summary. Suspicious men by the waterfall, a near confrontation, a warning shot. Aubrey filled in details, her voice shaking as she described how they advanced toward her. I felt a protective fury welling again, anger that strangers could intrude on the ranch and threaten one of the family. William's face grew stony. We need to file a report, maybe get the sheriff to come out here, he declared. And we'd best keep a closer eye on that area. They might come back. Helen gently guided Aubrey inside, murmuring about getting her into dry clothes. Jonah and I exchanged glances. Both of us recognized this was likely no coincidence. If Hartley's crew was behind this, they'd escalated from fence cutting to actual confrontation. Before following the others in, Aubrey paused by the doorway, looking back at me. Her expression held a new depth gratitude, maybe, mixed with lingering shock. Thank you, Ethan, she said, voice subdued. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In that moment, everything felt sharp-edged, the tension coiling around the ranch even tighter. If Hartley wanted to spook us into folding, he'd picked a risky game. My heart pounded with a cold resolve I recognized from the days I plotted against Melanie's betrayal. Stepping inside, I wondered just how far things would go and whether I'd be prepared to protect this family when the next threat loomed. The stakes felt real now, and the slow, ominous question pressing at my thoughts was, how deep does Hartley's corruption run? We'd find out soon enough. But for now, the only certainty was that the ranch was no longer just my hiding place. It was a battleground. I stood at the edge of the ranch house porch, phone clutched in my hand, rereading the text from my lawyer for the third time. My gut twisted with a familiar blend of anger and anticipation. The message was clear. Melanie was cornered, broke, and demanding I show up in person to settle our divorce. A cold wind rolled across the yard, stirring dust at my feet. This was it, the moment I'd been engineering for months. Marcus had warned me Melanie might lash out, but I never expected her to be so desperate she'd actually beg me to come back. Even the ultimatum from my lawyer, accept minimal settlement or get nothing, hadn't deterred her. She wanted to see me face to face, presumably hoping to manipulate me one last time. I tucked my phone into my jacket pocket and exhaled slowly. It was late afternoon, and the sun's angle cast long shadows over the pasture. Behind me, I heard the screen door squeak open. Aubrey stepped out, arms folded across her chest. She'd been observing me more closely these days, ever since the near attack at the waterfall. "You've been restless," she said softly, coming down the porch steps to stand beside me. "Anything I should know?" I hesitated. My entire plan, my hidden identity, the offshore accounts, the scheme to starve Melanie financially felt heavier than ever. "Just stuff from my old life," I replied, picking my words carefully. "It's coming to a head." She studied me with those sharp hazel eyes, suspicion mingled with concern. "I figured you had some loose ends. You've been pacing around like a caged animal." She paused, glancing toward the barn where Jonah was repairing a broken gate. "Whatever it is, I hope you're careful." "Careful is all I've been," I said, offering a tight smile. "Don't worry, I won't bring trouble here." A flicker of doubt passed over her features, but she nodded. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken things filling the space between us. Later that evening, I retreated to my cabin and placed a call to my lawyer. He answered on the first ring, sounding harried but determined. "We served the ultimatum papers to Melanie," he said. "She's furious. She claims you drained accounts illegally and she's threatening to push for some form of spousal maintenance." My jaw clenched. "But we know her affair with Chase is the reason I left. I've got proof." "Exactly," he replied, voice steady. "We can bury her in evidence if needed. The question is, do you want to finalize this quietly, or do you want a public showdown?" I thought about Melanie's haughty smirk, the way she'd bragged about taking half my assets, the months of living in fear that she'd trap me in court. "I don't want to drag it out," I said, "but I'm not giving her a dime more than we agreed." "Understood," he said. "She's demanding you appear in person, claiming you can't divorce her from hiding. Legally, we could fight that, but it might prolong everything. If you show up and sign face-to-face, it ends quickly." My stomach nodded. Showing up meant risking my newfound anonymity, risking that Melanie or her lawyers might trace me back to Beckett Ranch. But the prospect of ending it once and for all was too tempting. "Set it up," I said. "I'll come to Texas." He agreed, warning me to be discreet. "She's in no shape to hire a PI or do anything fancy," he assured. "She's broke after all, but keep a low profile anyway." After the call, I paced the cabin. It was time to face Melanie, to watch her come to terms with the fact that she would walk away with almost nothing. The thought fueled a cold satisfaction within me, but it also stirred up old sorrow. Once, I'd have given her the world. Now, all she got was a handful of dust. I hardly slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined her face twisting in anger and shock or maybe scorn. By dawn, I'd resolved to keep my departure short and under wraps. No one at Beckett Ranch needs to know the details. They had enough to worry about. Hartley's threats were escalating, and we were still reeling from the men who nearly cornered Aubrey. I'd slip out, handle my business, and return as quickly as possible. Over breakfast, William announced that a few more calves had gone missing in the night. Jonah looked ready to burst a blood vessel, muttering curses under his breath. Helen tried to keep morale high by cooking a hearty spread of scrambled eggs, biscuits, and bacon, but the tension around the table was thick. I poked at my plate, lost in thought, until Aubrey's hand touched my arm. "Ethan, you're wearing that frown again," she teased, but her voice held genuine worry. I mustered a half-smile. "Got a lot on my mind, that's all." Jonah squinted at me from across the table. "You fixin' to leave town for a bit?" Heat rose in my cheeks. "Just a quick trip to handle some personal stuff," I admitted. I'd told William I needed a few days off but hadn't offered details. "I'll be back, though, I promise." William nodded, looking slightly concerned but not pushing. "We'll hold down the fort." Aubrey's eyes flicked between me and her father, a question forming in her gaze that she didn't voice. We finished breakfast in tense quiet. That afternoon, I packed a small duffel in my cabin, carefully checking that I left no paperwork or clues about the ranch behind. My phone buzzed Marcus texting me flight details. I'd drive to a neighboring city, catch a flight under an alias. The final confrontation with Melanie was scheduled 2 days from now. Before I could leave, Aubrey knocked on my cabin door, her expression shadowed by worry. "You're going, aren't you?" she asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The soft afternoon light cast a halo around her auburn hair. I zipped my duffel shut. "Yeah, I have to settle something from my past." I hated how vague that sounded, but I couldn't risk telling her everything yet. Not until I was sure it wouldn't blow back on them. She sighed. "Well, safe travels," she said, voice tight. "Just come back, okay? My parents, they care about you. So do I." The warmth in her eyes caught me off guard. I'd grown used to her skeptical edge. Now it felt like she was letting down a guard of her own. I swallowed hard. "I promise I'll be back." With that, I brushed past her gently, heading to my car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing her silhouette framed by the ranch's open field. My chest tightened with an unfamiliar longing. I'd walked out on one woman before Melanie, but it was different now. Aubrey wasn't my wife, and she'd never lied to me the way Melanie had. Still, I hated leaving her in a storm of half-truths. "Focus," I told myself, gripping the wheel. "You have a final showdown with Melanie. After that, maybe, just maybe, a real future awaits you back at Beckett Ranch." In my motel room near the airport that night, I got a call from my lawyer confirming the next day's meeting. "She's demanded it be at her cousin's law office," he said. "Small-time place, but enough to handle the final documents." "Fine," I said, the adrenaline already surging. "Let's end this." As I drifted off to an uneasy sleep, I imagined Melanie's face, her voice echoing with the words I'd overheard so long ago. "Chase wants me to move in. I'll get half of everything." But tomorrow, she would learn what it meant to bet on betrayal and lose. The next morning, I boarded a flight to Texas, under a name I barely recognized, an alias Marcus had arranged. My reflection in the airport bathroom mirror looked haunted, dark circles under my eyes from too many late nights. But there was a new resolve beneath the fatigue. Melanie wouldn't control my life anymore. Marcus picked me up at the airport. He was a tall, genial guy with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, wearing a rumpled dress shirt and tie loosened around his neck. "Man, you look rough," he said, offering a quick hug. "Ready for this?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I muttered. We slid into a sedan, the mid-morning sun glaring off the windshield. On the drive to the law office, Marcus filled me in on the final details. "They're expecting you at noon. Melanie's going to be there, plus a representative from her cousin's firm. They've got some half-baked claim that you wrongfully depleted marital assets, but we have the bank records, plus evidence of her affair." He eyed me sidelong. "You sure you're okay about revealing her infidelity publicly?" I gripped the door handle, knuckles whitening. "If that's what it takes," I said. "I have no illusions about us reconciling." She made her bed. He nodded. "All right. Just remember, we're not out to humiliate her unnecessarily, though it might happen anyway if she fights too hard." 10 minutes later, we pulled up to a modest one-story building with a small sign reading Williams & Associates. My heart thudded in my chest. This was the place where I'd watch the final thread of my marriage unravel. Inside, the reception area smelled of stale coffee. A secretary directed us to a conference room at the end of a narrow hallway. My pulse pounded in my ears as I followed Marcus in. The overhead fluorescence cast a harsh light on a battered table littered with manila folders. Melanie was already there, seated on one side, fiddling nervously with a pen. She looked thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in me, anger, pity, and a strange nostalgia for the woman I once loved. She glanced up, her eyes widening at the sight of me. "Ethan," she breathed, voice tinged with disbelief. I kept my face impassive, settling into the chair opposite her. "Melanie." Her cousin, the so-called lawyer, cleared his throat, shuffling papers. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Let's begin," he said stiffly. Marcus presented our case calmly, citing legal references to show how Melanie had no valid claim to more than the minimal settlement. Then he dropped the bombshell, the evidence of her affair with Chase, which legally undermined her position under certain state statutes. I watched Melanie's face pale as photos and messages were laid out. The pen in her hand trembled. That's private," she stammered, shooting me a venomous glare. Marcus pressed on. It's relevant, given you intended to divorce Ethan for half his assets while being unfaithful. He has every right to protect himself. The cousin tried to object, but it came out half-hearted. Everyone in the room could smell the desperation. Melanie's argument about wrongful depletion of assets fell apart when confronted with the timeline of her affair. She'd been planning to leave me for months, yet she expected me to keep money in accounts she could seize? Finally, Melanie slammed her pen down, eyes brimming with tears. I was unhappy, Ethan, she said, voice shaking. Everything between us was falling apart. You were so distant, and Chase was a mistake, okay? But you took everything from me. I felt a cold pang in my chest. She had the nerve to act like I was the villain. I gave you everything, I replied quietly. And I left you more than enough chances to come clean. You chose betrayal. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I never thought you'd just vanish. You left me with nothing. I stood, anger flaring in a sharp wave. You wanted half of my life so you could start a new one with him. Did you think I'd just hand it over? Silence fell. Marcus cleared his throat, motioning for me to sit. Reluctantly, I did. The cousin shook his head, looking hapless. Given these facts, he said, voice low, we advise Melanie to accept the minimal settlement. Continuing to fight will only cost more in legal fees. A strangled sob escaped Melanie. She shot me one last glare of resentment. I'll sign, she whispered, but I hate you for this. I pushed away the twinge of guilt. This was the path she'd forced me onto. Then let's finalize it, I said, striving for a calm I didn't feel. So we can both move on. Papers were passed around for signatures. My hand shook slightly as I scrawled my name, remembering the day I'd once signed our marriage certificate so full of hope. Marcus notarized everything, and within half an hour, it was over. I stared at the stack of signed documents, astonished at how swiftly it all ended. Melanie gathered her purse, eyes downcast. As she moved to leave, she paused by my chair, voice trembling. Why did you do it this way? You could have just talked to me. I met her gaze, seeing a hollow sadness in her eyes. Talking wouldn't have changed anything, I murmured. You decided we were done the day you told Nicole about your plans with Chase. For a second, I thought she might say something else, but she just shook her head, tears clinging to her lashes. Without another word, she slipped out of the conference room, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume, a ghost of the life we'd shared. Marcus exhaled, turning to me with a small, grim smile. That's it, man. She's got no legal ground left. He clapped my shoulder gently. You okay? I swallowed hard. I don't know. Feels strange to be free. You did the right thing, he said, packing up the files. Let's get out of here. We walked out into the midday sun. My chest felt heavy, a swirl of triumph and regret. I'd achieved my revenge. Melanie would leave with a fraction of what she wanted, her affair in tatters. Yet I couldn't shake the sorrow of remembering a time when I'd have moved mountains to make her happy. Marcus drove us to a quiet bar near the airport, where we sipped cheap beer in silence. At one point, he raised his glass. To new beginnings, he toasted. I nodded, tapping his glass lightly. A wave of exhaustion crashed over me, but behind it lay a flicker of relief. It was finally done. Melanie was no longer my problem. Soon, the courts would finalize everything. When I left the bar, I hugged Marcus in thanks. He'd been my rock through this ordeal. You need a ride somewhere? He asked. I shook my head. I'll grab a cab to the airport. Flight leaves tomorrow morning. Gonna stay in a motel overnight, then head back. He offered an encouraging pat on the back. Take care of yourself, and if you ever need anything, call. I promised I would. Then I stood on the curb, watching him drive away. My heart pounded with an odd mix of emptiness and a tentative sense of hope. No more running from Melanie. No more fear of her taking half my life. She'd demanded I appear in person, and she got her wish only to walk away with next to nothing. Now I found myself thinking not about the wreckage I left behind, but about the ranch. About William, Jonah, and especially Aubrey, waiting for me to come back. I couldn't deny the pull that place had on me. Maybe that was where I truly belonged now. I arrived back at Beckett Ranch late in the afternoon 2 days later, the dusty driveway crunching under my tires as I pulled up in my borrowed truck. My mind still buzzed with the aftermath of meeting Melanie, though I felt a sense of finality. I'd done what I set out to do. Stepping out, I inhaled the familiar scent of hay and open fields. The difference was stark compared to Texas's bustle. Here, everything felt calmer, tinted with the soft glow of the setting sun. It reminded me that, for better or worse, this was my new home now. Jonah spotted me first. He was unloading feed near the barn, and he paused, raising a hand in greeting. "Thought you'd be gone another day," he said. I shrugged, hauling my duffel out of the truck bed. "Got things wrapped up faster than expected." He studied me, eyes narrowed as though he sensed the tension radiating off me. But Jonah wasn't the type to pry, so he just nodded. "Glad you're back. We got some fence damage on the east side this morning. Probably more sabotage." He spat on the ground, scowling. A familiar anger stirred in me at the thought of Hartley's crew. "I'll help you fix it tomorrow," I said, half to reassure him, half to remind myself I had a job to do. The screen door to the main house slammed and Aubrey emerged, crossing the yard in brisk strides. She wore jeans and a faded shirt smeared with some kind of dirt or grease, probably from a vet call. Her expression was guarded, but her eyes held relief. "Welcome back," she said, voice tight. "Thanks." My chest constricted at the memory of her concern before I left. We hadn't parted on an argument, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "How's everything here?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "The usual chaos. Hartley's men have been prowling around. Dad's about ready to camp out at the fence line with a shotgun." She paused, gaze flicking over my face. "You look exhausted." I sighed. It was intense, but it's done. I fumbled for words, not sure how much she wanted or needed to hear. "I ended some legal stuff with my ex," I finally said. "She can't bother me anymore." A hint of surprise crossed her features, then something like understanding. "Legal stuff," she echoed softly. "I guess that explains why you were so cagey." My throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I couldn't talk about it yet didn't want to drag you all into my mess." I swallowed, memories of Melanie's tear-streaked face flickering in my mind. But yeah, it's settled now. She folded her arms. "You sure you're okay? Was I okay? My marriage had collapsed spectacularly, and I'd orchestrated a revenge so thorough it left my ex-wife with nothing. I felt both liberated and haunted." "I think so," I managed, voice low. "Just a lot of emotions." Something in my expression must have pierced her skepticism, because Aubrey's stance softened. Her hand brushed my forearm in a gesture that spoke more than words. "Maybe after dinner we can talk," she offered quietly. I nodded, a grateful ache swelling in my chest. "Yeah, I'd like that." Dinner at the main house was subdued. William complained about new fence cuts. Helen tried to keep the mood light, fussing over plates of roast chicken and vegetables. Jonah ate in stony silence, clearly simmering over the ongoing sabotage. Halfway through the meal, William turned to me. "Heard you had personal matters, but we're sure glad you're back. Got plenty to keep you busy." His tone was light, but his eyes were kind. I dipped my head in acknowledgement. Happy to pull my weight. And I meant it. Hard work was something I could lose myself in a welcome relief from the swirling guilt and triumph left over from seeing Melanie. Aubrey barely spoke during dinner. She seemed deep in thought. Only once, when Helen commented that the ranch might need some new security measures, did Aubrey glance my way, her eyes reflecting a silent question. Finally, after the meal, I slipped outside and leaned against the porch railing. The fading light turned the sky a bruised purple. Moments later, Aubrey came out, hugging a cardigan around her shoulders. She approached hesitantly. "So do you want to talk about it?" I stared at the horizon, the distant line of trees merging into shadows. "Melanie," I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. "She was my wife. We had a good life once, or so I thought. Then I found out she'd been cheating on me and planned to divorce me for half of everything." I paused, struggling to encapsulate months of anger, heartbreak, and cunning. When I realized it, I left, hid my money, Vanished? I guess you could say I orchestrated a revenge so she couldn't take what she wanted. Aubrey absorbed this quietly, shifting her weight. That's a lot, she said, voice cautious. Yeah. I rubbed a hand over my face, recalling Melanie's stunned expression when our settlement concluded. I went back to finalize the divorce. She's left with practically nothing. Is that what you wanted? Aubrey asked, searching my face. To see her suffer? A jolt of pain lanced through me. At first, yes, I admitted. I was furious. But standing there, watching her realize she'd lost, My voice wavered. I don't know anymore. Maybe I wanted closure. Aubrey came closer, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. I get it. You were hurt. You took action to protect yourself. That doesn't make you a monster. Emotions roiled in my gut, relief, regret, gratitude. I'm not proud of everything I did, I confessed, meeting her gaze. But it's over now. I can finally move on. She studied me a moment, then a small, sad smile curved her lips. If I'd been betrayed like that, I don't know what I'd do. You're stronger than I thought. The sincerity in her voice melted some of the tension in my chest. Thanks, I said quietly. I just didn't want to drag you or your family into it. She nodded. Now I understand why you were so secretive. Then, as if drawn by an impulse neither of us fully grasped, she leaned in and wrapped her arms around me in a brief, tight hug. My heart hammered at the warmth of her body against mine. I hadn't felt genuine compassion like this in so long. Slowly, I returned the embrace, my fingers gently resting on her back. Under the glow of the porch light, it felt like the battered parts of my soul were beginning to mend. We pulled apart, a flush rising to her cheeks. The quiet around us felt charged, brimming with unspoken possibilities. Guess we should check on the others, she said softly, clearing her throat. Yeah. My voice came out hoarse. We turned to re-enter the house, shoulders brushing as we walked side by side. Inside, the living room lamp cast a warm glow, and the sense of acceptance wrapped around me like a blanket. A while later, as I returned to my cabin, I realized the ache in my chest had dimmed. Melanie's hold on me had finally broken, and Aubrey's empathy had revealed a new horizon. For the first time since leaving my old life, I sensed a path that wasn't defined by anger or vengeance, but by something gentler, something real. I took a deep breath, exhaling the last remnants of bitterness. Tomorrow, I'd throw myself into ranch work with renewed focus, eager to see if the future here, with these people, could truly be mine. The next morning dawned with a sense of foreboding in the air. Even the horses seemed jittery as Jonah and I set about feeding them. A cloying tension lingered in the back of my mind. Hartley's sabotage had escalated while I was gone, and no one knew if he'd push further. By mid-morning, William called a quick meeting in the barn. He looked tired, the lines on his face carved deeper by worry. Last night, he said, someone cut fences on the northeast side. We lost 3 more calves. Sheriff's been out, but he says it's not enough to take action without proof. Helen scowled, crossing her arms. We can't keep bleeding like this. Sooner or later, we'll be forced to sell. A surge of protectiveness flared in me. I remembered how helpless it felt to watch Melanie nearly seize my finances, and I recognized that same desperation in William's eyes. Jonah and I can check the area again, I offered. Maybe set more cameras. Aubrey stepped forward, jaw clenched. I'll come too. If someone's messing with our herd, I'm not sitting back anymore. William hesitated, concern flickering across his face. Then he nodded. All right, but be cautious. By early afternoon, the 4 of us, William, Jonah, Aubrey, and I, rode out to the northeast fence. We found the telltale signs of tampering. Wires snipped clean, fresh footprints in the mud, even tire tracks suggesting a trailer had backed up to load the stolen calves. Jonah crouched beside the tracks. Look at these treads, he muttered. Could belong to a heavy-duty pickup. Bet it's the same group that's been circling us for weeks. Aubrey's lips pressed into a thin line. Hartley's men, no doubt. William scanned the horizon. Let's head deeper. Maybe they left something behind. We moved as a unit, following the trail into a stretch of wooded land that edged the property. The air was still, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. My senses thrummed, every rustle of leaves putting me on edge. Suddenly, Jonah raised a hand for silence. He pointed ahead, where a faint metallic clang echoed between the trees. We dismounted, tying our horses to branches, and proceeded on foot. My heart hammered as I recalled the men near the waterfall. This time, we weren't unarmed. I had my revolver, Jonah carried his rifle, and William gripped a shotgun. Aubrey had a small firearm holstered at her waist as well. We crept through the undergrowth, following the sound. That's when we spotted them 3 men loading a pair of frightened calves into a beat-up trailer parked in a shallow ravine. My blood ran hot. This was more than sabotage. It was outright theft. Before we could formulate a plan, the men spotted us. One cursed and reached for a rifle leaning against the trailer. In a split-second reaction, Jonah and I raised our weapons. "Don't move!" Jonah bellowed, voice echoing through the trees. A tense standoff ensued. The men hesitated, glancing among themselves. They probably hadn't expected us to roll up so fast. One of them, a burly guy in a stained baseball cap, spat on the ground. "You got no right," he snarled, but he didn't move for his rifle again. William stepped forward, shotgun aimed but steady. "You're on my land, stealing my cattle. I got every right." Aubrey's eyes blazed with anger. "We're calling the sheriff," she said, pulling out her phone. "We have all we need to put you behind bars." The third man, taller and leaner, snorted. "Don't matter. We work for Hartley. You might get us, but he'll keep coming." My stomach twisted. So it was Hartley. I knew it, but hearing them say it outright unleashed a wave of fury. "Not if we have proof of his involvement," I said, voice surprisingly calm. "We've got photos of you trespassing, plus you're in possession of stolen calves. The sheriff won't ignore this." A flicker of doubt crossed the men's faces. They clearly weren't prepared for a confrontation with a fully armed group. At that moment, I spotted movement in the corner of my eye. Someone else was lurking behind the trailer. Another figure stepped forward, carrying a handgun. He leveled it in our direction. "Back off!" he roared, eyes wild. Jonah swung his rifle around. A heartbeat of chaos followed. The man fired a shot into the ground near Jonah's feet. Dirt and debris kicked up, stinging Jonah's leg. In a flash, William fired his shotgun into the air, the deafening blast snapping everyone's attention. "Enough!" he thundered. Silence descended, broken only by the panicked lowing of the calves in the trailer. The man with the handgun froze, sweat beading on his brow. Jonah grimaced, but he held steady. "Drop your weapons," I said, my own revolver aimed unwaveringly. "Now!" Slowly, grudgingly, the gunman complied, followed by the other men. Aubrey, her phone pressed to her ear, relayed the situation to the sheriff's office. "Yes, northeast boundary, near the ravine," she said, voice taut. "Multiple suspects, stolen calves, hurry." The men exchanged nervous glances, clearly regretting their boldness. I glanced at Jonah, who stepped forward to kick away the guns. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Within 20 minutes, we heard sirens wailing in the distance, a rare sound in these parts. The sheriff and 2 deputies arrived, guns drawn, ready for trouble. We all breathed a little easier as they took the men into custody, collecting statements from each of us. Sheriff Watkins, a gruff older man with a gray mustache, eyed the scuffed area where the trailer had been. He whistled softly. "You folks just nabbed yourselves a band of rustlers. We've suspected Hartley for a while, but never had direct proof." Jonah nodded, handing over the men's confiscated rifles. "We got more evidence back at the ranch: footprints, cut fences, pictures. This is only a piece of what they've been doing." The sheriff's eyes glinted with newfound determination. "I'll see to it that Hartley's name gets dragged into this. If these guys flip on him, he'll face charges, too." Aubrey exhaled in relief, leaning against William's shoulder. I felt my own knees wobble from the adrenaline crash. We'd done it, we'd cornered them with no casualties, and the law was finally on our side. I stepped away, feeling the need for a moment's solitude. My breath was ragged, heart still pounding. The memory of that final shot at my feet replayed in my mind. I could have been killed. Yet all I felt was a fierce satisfaction that we'd protected the ranch. After the sheriff and deputies departed with the arrested men, we led the rescued calves back to our land. Twilight fell, painting the sky in purples and oranges. William walked beside me, his shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. He cleared his throat. "Ethan, we owe you. If you hadn't stepped up," I shook my head, "you'd have done the same for me." In truth, I was just glad to help these people who had given me a home. Aubrey waited near the barn, arms folded. She looked at me with something like admiration in her eyes. "That was brave," she said softly, glancing at the pistol I still held. I'd forgotten it was in my grip, adrenaline coursing too strong to let go. "Just doing what needed to be done," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Guess we can all sleep a bit safer tonight." She nodded, her expression relieved yet still laced with tension. "But if Hartley gets arrested, he'll try to cut a deal or bail out. We're not out of the woods yet." I knew she was right. Powerful men rarely stayed behind bars without a fight. But for now, we had the upper hand. "We'll face that when it comes," I said firmly. Jonah snorted, coming up behind us. "I'd love to see that bastard squirm," he growled. But there was a note of satisfaction in his voice. "He's messed with us for too long." A hush settled over us, the weight of victory mingling with the knowledge that new challenges might lie ahead. But for this moment at least, the ranch was safe and I felt a sense of renewed purpose. I'd come here as a runaway from my own shattered life, and now I stood as part of a community that refused to be bullied. As night fell in earnest, we secured the barn, ensuring the rescued calves were calm. Then we all headed to the main house, exhaustion pressing in. Over a hastily prepared meal, we recounted the confrontation in hushed, disbelieving tones. William toasted with a glass of water, since nobody had the energy to fetch a bottle of wine. "To standing our ground," he said simply, eyes gleaming with gratitude. I raised my glass, exchanging a look with Aubrey. A part of me recognized this as another turning point. My old life was closed, and a new chapter was forming right here. Hartley's downfall was only the beginning of changes that might reshape the ranch, and possibly my own destiny. But for tonight, I let the day's triumph soak in, my anger at Melanie replaced by a quieter sense of belonging. In the back of my mind, I felt a spark of something close to hope that I could finally move forward without the shackles of the past. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when I emerged from my cabin, breathing in the crisp morning air. I'd slept better than I had in months, no nightmares about Melanie or stolen accounts. I had an email on my phone from my lawyer confirming the divorce had been formally processed. Melanie gets a minimal settlement, and I'm free. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it nearly brought tears to my eyes. Walking to the barn, I heard Jonah's low whistle. He was already putting fresh hay out for the horses. I caught his eye, and he raised a brow in silent question. Over the past few days, I'd hinted that my legal situation would be resolving soon, but I never gave specifics. "It's done," I said, voice hushed. "All final." He grunted in acknowledgement. "Good. Saw how that weighed on you." Then he turned back to the horses, letting me process in my own time. That was Jonah's style, no prying, just acceptance. I spent the morning working with him to mend a section of fence we'd patched up the week before. It was an endless task around here, as if the ranch itself breathed and shifted, demanding constant care. The mundane routine felt good, an antidote to the chaos of legal battles and hidden identities. Every nail I hammered reminded me that I was forging a new life, no longer running. Around lunchtime, William hollered from the porch that he and Helen wanted a quick talk. Jonah and I washed up at the spigot and headed over. They sat at the kitchen table, a couple of old maps spread out in front of them. "We've been discussing expansion," William said, tapping a finger on a boundary line. "Now that Hartley's in legal trouble, the local market for ranch goods might shift in our favor." Helen nodded, her eyes sparkling with cautious optimism. "We've also got a little nest egg saved up. Nothing huge, but if we reinvest properly, we can rebuild more efficiently fences, barn repairs, maybe new equipment." I ran a hand through my hair, recalling the countless hours I spent analyzing finances during my old life. Though I wanted to leave that past behind, I couldn't deny that I had skills that might help them. "I can assist with budgeting and planning," I offered. "If you want." William's brows shot up. "You'd do that?" "Sure." A part of me still bristled at the memory of Melanie trying to seize my funds, but I trusted William and Helen. They'd given me a home, and now I wanted to give back. I know a thing or two about numbers. Let's do it, Helen said, smiling. The ranch is your home too, Ethan. We value your input. That evening, I found myself at the old oak kitchen table, spreadsheets splayed across my laptop. While William and Helen busied themselves with tasks, I typed in projected expenses, feed costs, fence replacements, potential land improvements. My mind churned through numbers, surprisingly at ease with this sort of problem solving. After the bitterness of my last financial battle, it felt good to tackle a positive project. Aubrey walked in, fresh from a veterinary call. She carried her medical bag, hair tousled by the evening breeze. "Puppy with a broken paw," she explained, setting the bag down. "What are you working on?" I swiveled the laptop to show her. "Ranch finances. Figuring out how best to use the money we have for expansions and repairs." She peered at the screen, lips curving in a half-smile. "I had you pegged for a city boy once," she teased. "Never thought you'd be knee-deep in ranch budgets." "Funny how things change," I said, voice soft. Our gazes held for a moment. Ever since I'd come clean about Melanie and my past, a new closeness had blossomed between us, a gentle warmth that neither of us forced, but both recognized. Aubrey patted my shoulder. "Just don't work yourself ragged. Dinner's in an hour. Helen won't let you skip a meal, you know." I promised I'd stop soon, turning back to the numbers. But as I keyed in the last figures, a sense of closure washed over me. The divorce was finalized. I wasn't hiding or running anymore. For the first time, I felt like I could truly invest in something, maybe even build a future here. Over the next few days, the ranch buzzed with energy. William was out early, checking fences and planning new grazing strategies. Jonah coordinated with me to purchase updated equipment. Even Helen got in on it, making calls to local suppliers and comparing feed prices. And Aubrey, juggling her veterinary work, found time to pop in and share her thoughts on how expansions might affect the animal's health. One afternoon, we gathered around the table, William, Helen, Jonah, Aubrey, and me, reviewing a plan I'd drafted. The idea was to build new fencing in strategic spots and then possibly add a few extra acres for winter feed crops. We'd still be modest compared to some big ranches, but if we played our cards right, we'd be stable enough to weather tough seasons. "I like it," William said, nodding. "We can handle the physical labor ourselves, save on contractor costs." Helen tapped a pencil on the table. "It's going to be a lot of work. Might need to hire part-time help, at least for the heavier tasks." Jonah shrugged. "Let's see how far the four of us get first." His mouth twitched with a rare grin. Aubrey sipped her coffee, setting the mug down carefully. "We should also think about marketing. Once we have a bigger yield, we can't just rely on the same small-time buyers." I looked at her, impressed. "That's a good point. Maybe I can research new outlets or talk to distribution networks in nearby towns." She shot me a grateful smile. Our eyes lingered on each other a second too long, until Helen coughed politely, snapping us both back to the conversation. My cheeks warmed, but I couldn't deny the spark between us. And this time, I wasn't running from it. That evening, after we'd all gone our separate ways, I lingered outside the barn. The sky was awash in dusky pink, the gentle glow reflecting off the weathered boards. The sense of peace settled over me, deeper than any I'd known in years. Even the memory of Melanie's betrayal felt like a distant echo, overshadowed by the tangible promise of this land. In that soft twilight, Aubrey appeared, her boots echoing on the barn floor. She carried a small lantern, the warm light dancing over her features. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "Just taking it all in. Everything's changed so fast. Feels good, you know." She stepped closer, the lantern illuminating her face. "You helped make it happen. If you hadn't stuck around, we might have lost the ranch to Hartley's stunts." A pang of pride and humility washed over me. I needed a place to start over. You guys gave me that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was charged, but it wasn't the old suspicious tension. This was something warmer, something that made my pulse quicken. Aubrey swallowed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Look, Ethan, I'm glad you're here. We all are." I reached out, touching her hand gently. The air seemed to hum. But before either of us could say more, a soft neigh from the horses interrupted, a reminder that life on the ranch never truly paused. She pulled back, offering a shy smile. I should go check on something. Good night. Night, I murmured, heart pounding as she disappeared into the darkness. My gaze lingered on the spot where she'd stood. Part of me wanted to call her back, to close the distance between us. But I held back. We had time to figure out what was happening between us. Time to build a future untainted by lies. Clutching the lantern she left behind, I headed to my cabin, a flicker of cautious hope lighting my way. A few weeks flew by in a blur of fence building, feed hauling, and strategic planning. The ranch was buzzing with a new sense of purpose. Even the animals seemed livelier, as if they sensed we were investing in their future. One late morning, as I pored over feed invoices at the kitchen table, Helen set a cup of tea beside me. "You've really taken to this place," she observed, her tone fond. "I remember when you first showed up, you were so quiet, almost haunted." I glanced at her, recalling those early days arriving with minimal belongings, weighed down by betrayal. "It's like a second chance," I said, stirring the tea. "Or maybe the first real chance." Her eyes shone with empathy. "We're grateful too, Ethan. You've put your whole heart into helping us." Just then, William strode in, hat tucked under his arm. "Helen, we got news Hartley might be forced to sell off a chunk of his land." He paused, acknowledging me with a nod. "Got a call from the sheriff's office. Seems the legal fees are piling up. He's in hot water." I stood, a jolt of surprise running through me. "Already? I figured he was in trouble after the rustling charges, but this is fast." William shrugged. "Once the state charges him bail, lawyer fees, it adds up. Then there's the potential restitution for stolen livestock." He exhaled. He might have no choice but to sell part of his ranch to cover it all. Helen and I exchanged glances. I could see in her eyes the flicker of opportunity. Expanding by taking over some of Hartley's land had probably crossed William's mind before. Now, it might become a real option. "Is that something we could handle?" I asked, leaning forward. My brain ticked through the finances we'd mapped out. We had some capital from the ranch's improved operations, plus a loan might be possible. But it was a bigger step than just patching fences. William's brow furrowed. "I'm not sure. We're doing better, but it'd be a big leap. I'd rather not risk everything." He glanced at me, then away, as if considering a delicate subject. Helen caught the look, then patted my shoulder. "Why don't we think on it? No need to rush. The rumors might not pan out immediately." I nodded, heart thrumming with possibility. Buying a piece of Hartley's land? That would flip the power dynamics completely, ensuring the ranch's future. But it also felt like stepping into bigger shoes than I'd worn before. That afternoon, I took a break from admin work and joined Jonah in the fields loading hay bales. Sweat drenched my shirt as I hoisted bale after bale into the pickup bed. After a while, we paused for water, panting in the heat. Jonah squinted at me, shading his eyes from the sun. "Heard about Hartley possibly selling. William mention anything to you?" "Yeah," I said, taking a long swig from my canteen. "It's not definite, but it's on the table." Jonah nodded slowly. "Might be a chance for us to get ahead. Been fighting for scraps too long." I studied his weathered face, understanding how deeply he cared for this ranch. "If we do it, we'll need a bigger plan. More hands, more resources. It won't be simple." He huffed a dry laugh. "When's anything ever simple here?" We finished loading the bales and headed back toward the barn. My mind churned with possibilities, loans, partnerships, expansions. A whisper of my old corporate self nudged me. I knew how to structure deals and funnel money around. But was I ready to wield that knowledge again in a bigger way? That evening, after chores, I found Aubrey in the makeshift clinic space she'd set up in a spare outbuilding. She was organizing medical supplies, her brow furrowed in concentration. A half-dozen dogs and cats in kennels waited for checkups or short-term observation. She glanced up as I entered, a tired smile lighting her face. "Busy day?" I asked softly. She exhaled. "Yeah. The word's out that I do everything from livestock to small pets, but I love it. Keeps me on my toes." I admired her dedication. We might need to expand your clinic too if the ranch grows. She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of excitement crossing her features. Heard about Hartley's land, huh? Word travels fast, I said, leaning against the wall. What do you think? Should we go for it? She paused, setting down a vial of medicine. I say yes, she answered, voice unwavering. We've struggled under Hartley's shadow for years. If we can buy part of his land, we secure the ranch's future and free this community from his bullying. Her certainty kindled my own. I'm thinking about it, but it means more risk, bigger finances. Aubrey's gaze lingered on me. I remember how you orchestrated that settlement with your ex, how you safeguarded your assets. If anyone can figure out a deal that benefits the ranch without sinking us, it's you. My breath caught. Aubrey had grown to trust me not just physically on the ranch, but with the big picture. I'd do anything to see this place flourish, I said, my voice low. And I like being here, more than anywhere I've been before. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she smiled. I'm glad to hear that. A comfortable silence settled, charged with an undercurrent of emotion. Before I could say more, a cat meowed from one of the kennels, breaking the moment. Aubrey turned to tend it, and I slipped out, heart pounding. We might not have fully defined what we meant to each other, but a quiet bond was growing, day by day. Over the next week, William and I started discreetly investigating the rumor about Hartley's land. We contacted the county clerk's office, searching for any sign of a lien or forced sale. Nothing was publicly filed yet, but our inquiries confirmed that Hartley was under significant financial strain. One afternoon, we ventured into town and spoke with an old acquaintance of William's, a local attorney named Miss Caldwell, who specialized in property deals. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, and wore her silver hair in a tidy bun. I can't reveal private details, she told us in her cozy office, but let's just say if an offer is made to Hartley at the right time, he might be compelled to accept. William glanced at me. You think we could pool resources? I rubbed the back of my neck. Potentially, yes. We'd need a bank loan or an investor. The ranch is improving, but we don't have enough cash on hand to buy a large chunk outright. Miss Caldwell watched us, her gaze calculating. If you want to keep your dealings under the radar, I can help. A silent purchase, perhaps through an LLC, so Hartley doesn't realize who's behind it until too late. A chill ran down my spine at the memory of creating shell accounts to hide money from Melanie. I'd never expected to use those skills again, but for William and Aubrey, for this ranch, maybe I could. When we left the office, William stared at the sidewalk, deep in thought. Finally, he turned to me. I hate the idea of sneaky dealings, but Hartley's a snake. If we do this up front, he might sabotage the sale. I met his gaze. Then we handle it carefully. Let me talk to some contacts about financing. We can keep your name out of it until the last moment. He nodded, eyes weary but resolute. All right, we've come this far. No sense backing down now. That night, as I sat in my cabin, my phone pinged with a message from Marcus, my old friend who'd helped me with the divorce. We'd been out of touch for a while, but the text read, "Heard you might be looking into property deals. Call me if you need any creative arrangements." My heart hammered. I'd confided in him about the ranch's situation vaguely, not expecting him to volunteer. But maybe this was fate. If I wanted to protect the Beckett's dream, and if I wanted a future here with Aubrey, I had to step up. I typed back, "Let's talk soon. Got a plan." Setting the phone aside, I leaned back, exhaling into the silence. A new chapter was unfolding, not driven by revenge this time, but by the hope of building something that lasted. The seeds of partnership had been planted. Now it was up to us to nurture them into a legacy that could finally outgrow the shadows of the past. We had spent days juggling ranch work, finances, and the covert possibility of buying Hartley's land. The tension felt oddly exhilarating, like we were on the cusp of a grand transformation. Still, everyday ranch life marched on fences to mend, animals to tend, and Aubrey's growing veterinary practice. One late afternoon, I found myself driving Aubrey out to a neighboring ranch where a pregnant mare needed checkups. The owners were an elderly couple named the Thompsons, kind folks who welcomed us with sweet tea on their porch. While Aubrey examined the mare, I helped the Thompsons stack a few bales of hay. Afterward, as we drove back, the golden sunlight bathed the fields in a surreal glow. Aubrey sighed contentedly, watching the scenery pass. I miss seeing sunsets like this when I'm cooped up in a clinic, she admitted, smiling at me. Glad we took this trip. Me too, I said, glancing her way. A quiet warmth pulsed between us, a closeness that had slowly blossomed from mutual respect to something deeper. We reached the ranch just as dusk settled. Aubrey hopped out, rummaging in the truck's bed for her medical bag. I circled around, heart pounding with something like anticipation. For weeks, I'd wrestled with an idea that had taken root in my mind: marriage. It was crazy, maybe too soon, but the notion kept returning. I'd lost my faith in marriage once, courtesy of Melanie. Yet with Aubrey, everything felt different. Real, honest. Hey, I said, my voice low. Could you come with me for a sec? I want to show you something. She tilted her head curiously. Sure, lead the way. We walked toward a small rise near the ranch's northern pasture. The sky was a tapestry of oranges and purples, the air hushed but for a distant cow's lowing. When we reached the crest, I paused, letting her take in the panoramic view of rolling fields, the barn lights glowing softly in the distance. This is one of my favorite spots, I murmured, heart hammering like a drum. It's peaceful, and it reminds me of what it felt like to truly start over. Aubrey watched me, her expression open, waiting. I swallowed. My chest felt tight, but in a good way. Reaching into my pocket, I produced a small box. Her eyes flickered with surprise, tears threatening at the corners. Ethan? Taking a steadying breath, I opened the box to reveal a simple ring, no massive diamond, just a modest band with a single small stone. I know my past was messy, I said, voice trembling. I never thought I'd trust marriage again. But you've shown me that real love is possible. You and your family, this ranch, you gave me a home. I can't picture my future without you. Aubrey's hand flew to her mouth, eyes shining. Oh my God. I love you, I continued softly. Will you marry me? Time seemed to slow, the ranch's evening hush enveloping us. Then she broke into a tearful laugh, throwing her arms around me. Yes, yes, of course, I love you too. We stood entwined, the ring forgotten between us for a heartbeat as she pressed her lips to mine. Relief and joy surged through me, so strong it nearly buckled my knees. I'd never felt such a fierce sense of belonging, like every wrong turn and heartbreak had led me to this moment. Eventually, she pulled back, cheeks flushed. William and Helen, oh gosh, they're going to be thrilled. I grinned. Might want to brace yourself for Jonah's teasing, though. She laughed, tears glimmering. I can handle him. We walked hand in hand back to the main house. The ring glittered faintly on her finger, a tangible symbol of the life we were building. I half expected my old anxieties about marriage to rear up memories of Melanie's betrayal, but they didn't. This was a different chapter, forged in trust rather than illusions. When we stepped inside, Jonah was helping William with some paperwork at the kitchen table, while Helen stirred a pot on the stove. They all glanced up, startled by our beaming faces. Aubrey cleared her throat, cheeks still flushed. So we have news. She lifted her hand, displaying the ring. The room exploded in excited shouts and hugs. Helen nearly dropped the spoon in shock, covering her mouth in delight. William's eyes actually watered, though he tried to hide it with a cough. Jonah slapped me on the back, muttering, "About time, city boy." Amid the commotion, Helen turned off the stove, crossing to envelop us in a warm hug. "Oh, sweetheart, this is wonderful," she said to Aubrey, then to me. "You've made us so happy." William's grin stretched from ear to ear. "I knew something was up with you two. Didn't think it'd be this soon, but I'm not complaining." Aubrey laughed. "Neither did we, Dad. It just feels right." Jonah snorted. "Now we'll really be a family. Guess I'll have to watch my language around you kids." We all burst out laughing, the tension of the last few months melting into a moment of shared joy. My chest tightened with gratitude. For so long I'd identified as the man who'd been betrayed, the one who vanished to protect his assets. Now I was Ethan, soon-to-be husband, and a partner in this ranch's future. That night, a spontaneous celebration broke out. Helen whipped up a celebratory meal, rummaging for a chilled bottle of champagne she'd saved for a special occasion. William offered a toast, raising his glass. "To family and to new beginnings," he said, voice thick with emotion. I can't wait to see what the future holds. I clinked glasses with Aubrey, our eyes locking with a promise that went beyond words. Over the meal, we chatted about the ranch expansions, the upcoming land possibilities, and how our marriage might roll into the bigger changes on the horizon. Jonah teased me again, half joking that I'd better not disappear on them like I disappeared from my old life. Not a chance, I vowed, feeling the sincerity burn in my chest. The next few days were a whirlwind of announcements, phone calls to close friends, and the quiet swirl of excited chatter around the ranch. Aubrey continued her vet duties, while I divided my time between manual labor and drafting possible financial structures for purchasing Hartley's land. A new hope infused everything we did. That hope wasn't universal, though. At the feed store, I overheard a couple of neighboring ranchers grumbling about that new guy Ethan, cozying up to the Becketts real fast. A pang of defensiveness shot through me, but I pretended not to hear. I'd known from the start that some folks might suspect my sudden involvement. Let them talk. I had nothing to hide anymore. My old secrets were laid bare for Aubrey, and she'd accepted me. One afternoon, while taking a break from unloading supplies, Jonah sidled up. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Hear some folks in town are gossiping about you," he muttered, eyes flicking to meet mine. "Saying you came out of nowhere, now you're practically running the ranch." I shrugged, a knot tightening in my gut. "Figured there'd be talk. Not sure what to do about it." He studied me with that keen gaze. "You keep doing your job. Folks will either come around or they won't. Besides," he added, "you're marrying Aubrey, so you're family. That counts for more than gossip." A warm gratitude swelled in my chest. "Thanks, Jonah." He grunted, pushing his hat back. "You're a good man, Ethan. If I didn't see it, I wouldn't trust you with my best friend's daughter." His mouth quirked in a grin. "Now, if you mess up, I'll come after you, but I don't think you will." I laughed softly, relief washing through me. "I'll do everything in my power not to. Promise." His smile widened, and he sauntered away, leaving me to finish unloading. The quiet acceptance from Jonah, a man who rarely doled out praise, was as good as any formal blessing. I set the crates down, gazing at the rolling fields that had become my sanctuary. The gossip didn't matter, nor did the doubts I once had. I had a place here, a family, and now a fiancé who shared my dreams. As the sun dipped low, I recalled the ring on Aubrey's hand and the radiant look in her eyes when she said yes. In that moment, every betrayal, every sleepless motel night, every ounce of heartbreak seemed worth it, because I'd found what I never thought I'd have again: real love and a future worth fighting for. Not long after the engagement excitement, we received official word. Hartley was indeed selling a sizable chunk of his ranch to cover legal expenses. The moment we learned of the listing, William called me into the living room where he'd pinned a map on the wall. "This is it," he said quietly, tracing a perimeter with his fingertip. "He's letting go of about 600 acres prime grazing land that borders ours on the east." Helen hovered beside him, face alight with a mixture of worry and excitement. "It's more acreage than we ever dreamed, Ethan. Buying it means a huge leap, but we can't let an opportunity like this slip by." I took a breath, recalling the hours of research I'd done. "We'll have to form a new entity, maybe a brand name separate from Beckett Ranch initially, so Hartley doesn't back out if he realizes it's us." William nodded. "I know you're used to these big financial moves. Just promise me we won't lose our shirts." I met his gaze evenly. "I promise. We'll do this carefully. Jonah, Aubrey, and I can help manage the extra acreage, and I've got to contact Marcus who can help set up the legal framework quietly." With that, we got to work. Over the next week, we formed a shell LLC Evergreen Holdings that would purchase Hartley's land. Miss Caldwell, the local attorney, assisted behind the scenes, ensuring our name stayed hidden until the ink was dry. Heart-pounding, I watched the finances flow in from a bank loan guaranteed by the ranch's improved performance, combined with some of my personal savings. A part of me feared it was too big a risk, reminiscent of how Melanie once threatened my resources. But every time doubt gnawed at me, I remembered how determined Aubrey looked, how Jonah gritted his teeth at the mention of Hartley's sabotage, and how William's shoulders carried the burden of keeping this ranch afloat. This was for the family, for our new future. It took a month of negotiations, but eventually we received the final documents. Hartley had signed, relinquishing those 600 acres to Evergreen Holdings. We tried to keep the transaction quiet, but small towns never lacked rumor mills. By the time we officially took possession, word spread that someone had bought out a massive chunk of Hartley's spread. People whispered and speculated, but no one had proof Beckett Ranch was behind it. One drizzly afternoon, Miss Caldwell arrived with a stack of forms for final signatures. The four of us, William, Helen, Aubrey, and I, gathered around the big kitchen table, hearts pounding. Jonah hovered in the doorway, arms crossed but eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Missy." Caldwell laid out the papers, her voice businesslike but laced with a smile. "Sign here, here, and here, acknowledging that Evergreen Holdings is merging with Beckett Ranch assets under the newly formed Double E brand, once the deed is fully recorded." Helen pressed a hand to her mouth. "Double E brand short for Ethan and—" William cut in, eyes twinkling. "We thought it might stand for Ethan and Aubrey's last name combined someday," he teased. "But also for a new era. Double E has a ring to it, don't it?" A laugh bubbled in my chest. This was bigger than any cunning plan I'd orchestrated before. "Double E," I repeated, picking up a pen. "Yeah, it suits us." We signed in turn William, Helen, me, and Aubrey. With each pen stroke, the ranch's destiny shifted. I couldn't help recalling how I once used secret accounts to hide from Melanie's greed. Now I was using similar strategies to protect a place I loved. Life had come full circle, but this time with honest intentions. Miss Caldwell gathered the papers, smiling. "Congratulations. I'll file these immediately. Once the deed merges, that land's officially yours to manage under your brand." Jonah let out a loud whoop from behind us. "Damn fine day." He slapped me on the back so hard I nearly stumbled. Helen laughed, tears shining in her eyes. "We're not stuck on that old brand alone anymore. We have a chance to flourish." Aubrey slipped her hand into mine, giving it a squeeze. "And no more Hartley overshadowing us," she said, voice trembling with relief. Later that night, we celebrated with a simple dinner. William roasted a chicken, Helen baked fresh bread, and we toasted with an inexpensive bottle of wine. The mood was jubilant, but also tinged with disbelief. None of us had imagined we'd come this far. After dinner, we lingered at the table, discussing the next steps, merging the new land, relocating some of our cattle, hiring extra ranch hands. Jonah mentioned a couple of old friends in town who might be open to part-time work. "Let's just hope we're not biting off more than we can chew," William said, though he wore a grin that betrayed his excitement. Helen patted his arm. "We have the help we need. And we have you, Ethan, to keep our finances straight. You've proven you can handle more than enough." A proud warmth spread in my chest. "I'll do my best." With a quick glance at Aubrey, I added softly, "We're all in this together." She caught my eye, a private smile blooming on her lips. I reached under the table, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. The days that followed were a whirlwind of logistical tasks. We put out the word we were hiring. New faces appeared at the ranch, eager folks who needed work, some with ranch experience, some just looking for an honest day's wage. Jonah coordinated duties, stepping naturally into a head foreman role. He seemed to relish the chance to manage a bigger crew, a proud gleam in his eye. As the newly titled Double E Ranch took shape, we carved out a corner of the newly acquired acreage for potential expansions, maybe a larger barn or a feed silo. We changed out old signage, brandishing the fresh brand. The rumor mill went into overdrive when it became obvious we controlled that land. I caught wind of a few locals muttering about how Ethan snagged that land from Hartley right under his nose. But it was overshadowed by the majority who seemed excited that the ranch was staying in local hands. One sunny afternoon, as we supervised the movement of some cattle to the new pasture, Aubrey sidled up beside me. She wore her usual jeans and boots, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. "Ever think you'd be running a ranch?" she teased, shading her eyes with one hand. I laughed, shaking my head. "If you'd told me a year ago I'd be here engaged to an incredible woman and building a future on a ranch, I'd have called you crazy." She smiled, gaze drifting over the rolling fields. Feels surreal, huh? Yeah, but a good kind of surreal. We walked the fence line, joking with Jonah and a couple of the new hands, ensuring the herd settled in smoothly. The smell of fresh grass and the distant sound of the wind in the trees lulled me into a calm I'd rarely known in my old life. Each step I took on this land reaffirmed that I'd made the right choice. That evening, William called us all to the living room. The entire extended ranch family, Helen, Jonah, the new hired hands, and some friendly neighbors had gathered for a Lauki celebration. Someone brought a guitar, picking out a slow country tune, and we chatted among flickering lanterns and the glow of the fireplace. "Since we're expanding, it's time for one more announcement," William said, clearing his throat. He looked at me and Aubrey with a broad grin. "We got a wedding in the near future, folks." A round of applause and cheers broke out, and my face flushed. Aubrey pressed close to me, her hand on my back. "We don't have a date yet," she added quickly, "but we're aiming for something not too far off." Jonah lifted a soda can. Someone had brought a case of them instead of fancy champagne. "Here's to Ethan and Aubrey, and to Doubly Ranch," he proclaimed. "Here, here," rang the chorus, the mood buoyant. I glanced at Aubrey, heart swelling at the synergy between my personal life and the ranch's success. This was a true merging my life, her dreams, and the Beckett legacy all fused under a new banner. The hush of the past grew distant, replaced by the hum of plans for a wedding, the next round of expansions, and the promise of a future built on honest love and hard work. The night ended with me and Aubrey stepping onto the porch, hand in hand, the ring shining on her finger in the dim light. She let out a contented sigh. "Feels like a fresh start, doesn't it?" I brushed a soft kiss to her temple, recalling the countless times I'd questioned if I'd ever feel whole again. "Yeah," I murmured, voice laced with gratitude. "It really does." Behind us, I heard the laughter of friends echoing from inside, the ranch house alive with warmth and promise. In that instant, I realized that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't haunted by betrayal, I was driven by hope. And that was a victory far greater than any revenge I'd once plotted. The sky was a dazzling blue on the morning of my wedding, as if the world itself decided to give me a blessing I never dreamed I'd deserve. I stood in front of a floor-length mirror in the small guest room of the ranch, trying to steady my breathing. An old friend of Aubrey's, Mia, had come into town to help coordinate, transforming the nearby pasture into a simple, rustic venue. Everywhere I looked, wildflowers and hay bales had been arranged into an inviting country setting. Jonah wandered in, wearing a collared shirt that looked a bit too stiff for his usual tastes. He smirked at my reflection. "You look about ready to pass out, city boy," he teased, crossing his arms. I exhaled a shaky laugh. "I'm a little stunned. Never thought I'd be standing here again a wedding day." Part of me still recalled how the last time I wore such formal clothes, I'd been marrying Melanie ignorant of the betrayal that would follow. But here the feeling was different, warm, honest, brimming with hope. Jonah clapped my shoulder in his rough, companionable way. "Time changes everything, don't it? Best get used to it." He left me alone after that, giving me space to compose myself. Moments later, William entered, fiddling with the cuffs of his shirt. He took one look at me and shook his head with a grin. "Nervous?" "Yeah," I admitted, swallowing the lump in my throat. "But good nervous." He nodded, eyes shining with emotion I rarely saw him display. "Your family now, officially. I can't tell you how happy I am to see you and Aubrey tying the knot, especially here, where it all began for you two." My gaze dropped to my polished boots. "I'm thankful," I said, voice husky. "You gave me a chance when I had nowhere else to go. Now this place has become my whole world." He patted my arm. "Enough sappiness. You better get out there before your bride decides you're taking too long." With a final check of my tie, I followed William out the front door and onto the ranch yard. A gentle breeze rustled the rows of folding chairs arranged on the open pasture. The sweet, earthy scent of grass and wildflowers filled the air, mingling with the faint perfume of the wedding arrangements. Guests, mostly local ranchers and friends, were already seated, chatting quietly. Helen stood near the makeshift altar, wearing a proud, tearful smile that set my heart at ease. I took my place by the wooden arch draped in hand-cut flowers. It reminded me of everything I'd come to love about this ranch. No glitz, just sincerity. Jonah settled at my side, arms folded, scanning the gathering crowd like a vigilant hawk. Even Miss Caldwell, our lawyer who'd helped with the land purchase, was present, offering me a small wave. Then the music started, simple acoustic guitar strumming from one of Helen's cousins. Everyone rose, turning to see Aubrey appearing at the far end of the aisle. My breath caught in my throat. She wore a flowing ivory dress, delicate lace at the shoulders, her auburn hair loosely pinned up with tiny wildflowers woven in. Her eyes found mine, and in that moment, time seemed to slow, the hush of the ranch intensifying each heartbeat. She reached me, slipping her hand into mine, and we turned to face the officiant, a local judge who was a friend of William's. The ceremony was brief but tender. Our vows spoke of trust, renewal, and the promise of building something lasting. Though my voice quivered with emotion, Aubrey's steady gaze anchored me, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this new chapter. When the judge pronounced us husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers, and I leaned in to kiss Aubrey. My heart pounded with a mixture of relief and quiet awe. The memory of Melanie's wedding day flitted through my mind, but it no longer filled me with bitterness. This moment was all about a second chance, free from the shadows of betrayal. The reception sprawled across the pasture. Tables set with mason jars of wildflowers, an old wooden dance floor hammered together by Jonah and me, and a makeshift buffet loaded with home-cooked dishes from neighbors. People mingled under the open sky, sipping lemonade or local craft beer. A soft country tune drifted from the speakers we'd rigged up. Aubrey and I shared our first dance beneath fading daylight. She rested her head against my shoulder, and I could feel her contented sigh. As the tune ended, William and Helen joined us for a dance, beaming with parental pride. Jonah, surprisingly light on his feet, twirled around with an older rancher's wife, drawing laughter from the onlookers. Eventually, Aubrey and I slipped away to a quiet corner near the corral fence. She leaned against the wooden rail, cheeks flushed from dancing and happiness. "You okay, husband?" she teased, testing the word. My chest tightened with wonder. Yeah, couldn't be better. I gently brushed a stray curl from her face. "You sure we shouldn't have gone for a fancy city wedding?" She laughed, eyes sparkling. "This is perfect. We're not city people, not anymore." I nodded in agreement, recalling the life I once led. Now the ranch's open skies and honest grit felt far more real than any corporate office or upscale reception hall. We'd decided on a short getaway, just a couple of days at a nearby lake cabin. With the ranch expansion in full swing, we couldn't afford a long absence. Yet the thought of spending uninterrupted time together, away from daily chores, filled me with excited anticipation. As the reception wound down, guests offered well wishes, and we thanked them all before sneaking off to pack an overnight bag. Helen, with tears in her eyes, handed us a basket of homemade snacks for the trip. William winked, telling us not to worry about the ranch for a couple of days. Jonah's gruff farewell was a muttered, "Don't come back too quick, or we'll never get a break from you lovebirds." The cabin by the lake was modest, a single-room wooden structure with a screened-in porch. The water shimmered under moonlight when we arrived, and I could smell the pine trees pressing in around us, thick and comforting. Inside, we kicked off our boots, laughing about the day's whirlwind events. No fancy gowns, no high-dollar decorations, just the memory of heartfelt vows and honest joy. We had dinner on the porch, nibbling on Helen's packed sandwiches, a blanket thrown over our laps against the cool breeze. The hush of nature enveloped us, interrupted only by the soft lapping of the lake. I couldn't help but feel the magnitude of this fresh start. I was a husband again, but this time the love was built on mutual respect, not illusions or hidden agendas. Aubrey and I stayed up late, talking about the future, maybe building a small house on the new property, continuing her veterinary practice, ensuring Jonah had enough support with the foreman role. When we finally curled up in bed, I pulled her close, reveling in the profound peace of being truly wanted and trusted. 2 days later, we returned to the ranch. The short honeymoon might have been modest, but it left us rejuvenated. William greeted us with a grin, pointing out that the livestock didn't stage a coup in our absence. Jonah teased that we looked too happy and must have had a little too good a time off. We all shared a laugh, the newlyweds stepping easily back into chores, planning, and life at Doubly Ranch. At dinner, Helen pointed out how the entire community seemed abuzz with talk of our wedding. Though a few naysayers still gossiped about me rising too fast, they were drowned out by genuine congratulations from neighbors who'd seen how much we poured into the ranch. Later that night, after finishing evening chores, Aubrey and I strolled through the fields, hand in hand. The sky glowed with stars, and I murmured how grateful I was to have this life, this marriage that felt like the polar opposite of my first. She squeezed my hand, her voice low and full of affection. "We'll keep building it together day by day." I glanced at her, heart full. "Yeah," I said softly. "Together." A sense of final closure settled over me. The old bitterness toward Melanie's betrayal no longer dominated my thoughts. Her memory had become a cautionary footnote, overshadowed by a future fueled by trust and love. And that was a victory far more precious than any I'd envisioned when I first set out on my covert path. Not long after our wedding, a subtle shift occurred in the ranch's routine. Aubrey started feeling unusually tired in the mornings, complaining of a mild queasiness she couldn't explain. At first, we both chalked it up to the seasonal allergies or the demands of her busy vet schedule, but one afternoon, I found her perched on a hay bale, pale-faced and rubbing her temples. "Everything all right?" I asked, setting down a bucket of feed. She peered up, giving me a wan smile. "I'm fine, just a little dizzy. This keeps happening, though." A hint of worry threaded her voice. My chest tightened with concern. "Maybe you should see a doctor. Could be the flu or something else." She hesitated, glancing at the barn door. "Maybe I'll call a colleague for some tests, just in case." Within a week, we had our answer, a life-changing one. Aubrey was pregnant. I stared at her in disbelief as she showed me the test results, her eyes shining with equal parts excitement and nerves. "A baby," I whispered, hardly able to wrap my mind around it. "We're having a baby?" Her lips curved into a teary smile. "Yes. Are you happy?" I pulled her into my arms, a surge of fierce protectiveness and wonder flooding my system. "Yeah," I murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." The next morning, over breakfast in the main house, we broke the news to William, Helen, and Jonah. Helen practically squealed, dropping her spatula in the process. William's jaw dropped. Then he burst into laughter, hugging Aubrey with tears in his eyes. Jonah, true to form, muttered something about another rascal to chase around, but he was grinning from ear to ear. Helen bustled around, talking about setting up a nursery and ensuring Aubrey got proper rest. William nodded along, occasionally looking dazed. Even Jonah teased me about fatherhood responsibilities. In the midst of all that, I felt a rush of gratitude so strong it made my breath catch. Once I'd been terrified of anything tying me down. Now I craved the stability of building a family at Doubly Ranch. With a baby on the way, Aubrey and I reevaluated our living situation. We'd been sharing a cozy space in the main ranch house, but we wanted a place of our own, especially if the family was about to grow. William suggested we expand an older section of the house. Jonah joked that we should build a separate cottage near the new acreage, giving us privacy and him some peace at night. After some debate, Aubrey and I agreed on renovating the ranch's old bunkhouse at the edge of the new land. It was sturdy, with plenty of room to convert into a comfortable home, plus space to add a small nursery. Helen and William were supportive, though they teased us about eventually needing an even bigger house if we wanted more than one child. My cheeks burned at the implication, but secretly, the thought of a bustling household warmed my heart. Amid the whirlwind of pregnancy excitement and house planning, my mind drifted back to how I once channeled cunning to preserve my assets from Melanie. Now, I wanted to use my financial insight for something more positive. Over dinner one evening, I brought up an idea to Aubrey. What if we start a small fund to offer low-interest loans to local vets or small ranchers who can't afford expansions or new equipment? I asked, swirling my fork in my mashed potatoes. I remember how isolated I felt when I needed help. Maybe we can create a community resource. Aubrey's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant," she said. We've seen how tough it is for small operators. A little capital injection at the right time could change everything. Helen, overhearing from the kitchen, chimed in. You two are kind. You sure we can manage it financially? I nodded. I'll crunch numbers, make sure we're not overextending ourselves. But with Double E Ranch doing better and the new land paying off, I think it's feasible. So we began drafting a plan, the Double E Community Loan Fund. We'd start small, just a few $1,000s to offer local folks short-term loans at minimal interest, especially for vet services, feed, or emergency repairs. Word spread quickly among neighbors that we were exploring philanthropic avenues. Some folks looked intrigued, others remained skeptical, unsure if we had an ulterior motive. But we pressed on, determined to do more than just enrich ourselves. After all, the sense of second chances had defined my life here. Why not extend that to others? Not everyone celebrated our philanthropic gesture. A local banker named Ned Grover, who'd profited from high-interest loans to ranchers for years, appeared at the ranch one day. He was tall, gaunt, with a clipped way of speaking that set my teeth on edge. I hear you're offering cut-rate loans, Ned said, approaching me outside the barn. That kind of thing disrupts the local banking scene. Don't you think you're meddling in professionals' territory? I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. We're just helping neighbors, I replied evenly. It's not about undermining anyone's business. Ned scoffed. You might want to consider the ramifications. Banks have been around a long time. We know how to protect our interests. A prick of annoyance flared. Are you threatening me? He put up his hands in mock innocence. Merely warning you not to poke a hornet's nest. Some folks might not appreciate your philanthropic ambitions. I stared him down until he finally shifted, muttered a goodbye, and left. The encounter left me uneasy, reminding me that no matter how well-intentioned we were, not everyone wanted changes in the status quo. Ned's veiled hostility suggested a brewing rivalry. I shared the incident with Aubrey, who frowned, gently placing her hand on her still flat stomach. We'll be careful, she murmured. But let's not let one cranky banker scare us off. Determined to solidify the ranch's standing in the community and overshadow Ned's grumblings, we hosted a local harvest festival on Double E Ranch. With the help of neighbors, we set up booths for crafts, local produce, and simple games like horseshoe toss. The ranch yard buzzed with laughter and the aroma of barbecue. Kids ran around, sneaking extra pieces of cornbread when they thought no one was looking. William and Helen thrived in the role of gracious hosts, regaling visitors with stories of how the ranch had expanded, the newly merged land, and the philanthropic fund. Jonah oversaw a small mechanical bull ride, chuckling as proud ranchers tried to last a full minute. Aubrey conducted a free pet checkup booth, quickly earning grateful smiles from folks who couldn't always afford vet visits. I meandered through the crowd, shaking hands and answering questions about the loan fund. Many seemed genuinely pleased, though I caught Ned Grover's disapproving glare from across the yard. He muttered something to a colleague before stomping off. I let him go. The rest of the day was filled with positivity music, shared meals, and a sense that Double E Ranch was truly at the heart of this community. That night, after the festival wound down and the last guests trickled out, Aubrey and I stood on the porch. The sky shimmered with stars, and she leaned against my side, her hand resting lightly on the small curve just beginning to show under her shirt. We did well, she said softly. Look at how many people came together. Yeah, I whispered, an undercurrent of pride surging in my voice. Feels like everything's falling into place. The ranch expansions, the philanthropic ideas, our baby on the way. Her gaze lifted to mine. You really are a different man than the one who first arrived at the diner, you know. I pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. You changed me, I admitted, along with everyone here. I wanted revenge once, but now I want to see things grow. She smiled, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. You deserve it, Ethan. We both do. As we stepped inside to settle in for the night, a tender glow settled in my chest. Maybe Ned Grover's grudge would cause trouble. Maybe the inevitable hardships of ranch life would test us, but we'd face it all together, strengthened by the knowledge that this place and each other was worth every fight. Autumn arrived with a crisp bite in the air, painting the ranch's fields in muted gold. The days shortened, and we found ourselves hustling to gather enough feed for winter. Jonah led the hired hands in a whirlwind of hay baling, ensuring we had a solid stockpile before the frosts set in. Aubrey's pregnancy continued smoothly, though she tired more easily. She tried to keep up with her vet calls, but William insisted on driving her around so she wouldn't exhaust herself. She protested at first, but I saw the relief in her eyes when she didn't have to navigate country roads on her own. One night, we gathered for dinner in the main house. Helen served steaming bowls of stew, and the conversation drifted to finances, particularly the philanthropic loan fund. We'd already approved a few small loans, including one to a rancher who needed urgent feed after a storm destroyed his barn. The grateful note he sent us nearly brought tears to Aubrey's eyes. Still, not everything was rosy. William rubbed his temples as we discussed the local market for beef. Prices are down again. Some big corporate suppliers undercut local ranchers. We might have to scale back or shift to a different strategy. Jonah nodded grimly. We can hold out if winter isn't too brutal, but we'll be cutting it close. A quiet tension fell over the table. My mind buzzed with potential solutions, maybe forging direct deals with restaurants or farmers markets. Yet I felt a pang of frustration. Even with the best planning, external factors could hammer us. Aubrey broke the silence, resting a hand on her growing belly. "We'll figure it out," she said, voice firm. "We've come this far." Her optimism kindled a spark in the rest of us. After dinner, I pored over the ranch's ledgers, searching for ways to weather the dip in beef prices. There was some relief in seeing that the philanthropic fund remained stable. At least we hadn't overextended ourselves. A part of me considered talking to that irritating banker, Ned Grover, but the thought of his smug face made me grit my teeth. We'd handle this ourselves. Then winter arrived, fiercer than we'd hoped. Early snow blanketed the fields, making daily chores a battle. We lost 2 calves to the cold snap, and half the ranch hands caught a nasty flu, leaving Jonah scrambling to cover the slack. I joined him in the bitter mornings, trudging through waist-deep drifts to check on the herds. Some days we hardly saw the sun, with only the frosty clouds of our breath indicating we were still alive. William fell ill for a stretch, too, coughing so hard Helen fretted nonstop. He insisted it was just a cold, but we forced him to stay indoors, resting. That left much of the decision-making to me, Jonah, and Aubrey, though she was nearing her 3rd trimester and couldn't handle heavy work. Together we managed, forging ahead in the biting wind. Late one evening, I returned to our bunkhouse, turned home, body aching from hours battling the drifts. Aubrey sat by the fireplace, her swollen belly a stark reminder of how close we were to parenthood. She offered a weak smile. "Rough day?" she asked softly. I sank onto the couch beside her, shrugging off my snow-crusted jacket. "We're surviving," I muttered, "but the cattle are stressed. We keep burning through feed faster than expected." She took my hand, stroking it gently. "We'll push through. If we have to buy extra feed, we dip into savings. The baby's not going to starve because we have fewer profits this season." Her blunt practicality made me smile. "You're right. I just hate the idea of taking on more debt." She squeezed my hand. "If we lose a little money now, that's not the end. This ranch and our family mean more than a perfect balance sheet." Closing my eyes, I leaned into her shoulder, letting the warmth of the fire and her presence soothe me. The constant juggling of finances, the physically draining chores, and the anxiety over impending fatherhood weighed on me. But with Aubrey by my side, it felt bearable. A few days later, I watched in awe as Aubrey treated a pregnant mare despite the frigid conditions. She wore a heavy coat, her belly beneath layers of warm clothing, calmly instructing the ranch hand who assisted her. Even in the swirl of snow, she moved with confidence, checking the mare's vitals, administering medication. It struck me how unwavering she was, forging ahead even when carrying our child. Later, we rode back to the barn in an ATV, the wind whipping our faces. She let out a breathless laugh when we finally parked, rubbing her belly. "Don't worry," she teased. "The baby is bundled up in layers of me. She's fine." "She?" I raised an eyebrow. We hadn't confirmed the baby's gender yet. She shrugged, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I just have a feeling. Could be a boy, but either way, I'm excited." My heart swelled. Boy or girl, they'll be a part of this ranch from day one. She nodded, eyes shining. And that's enough to keep me going. As the winter dragged on, I caught glimpses of Aubrey wrestling with her own fears. One night, while I worked late on ranch paperwork, I found her sitting in our bedroom gazing at a baby blanket Helen had sewn. "What if I'm not ready?" she murmured. "What if we're not ready? All this ranch drama, the expansions raising a child in the midst of it." I knelt beside her, heart twisting. "We'll figure it out," I assured. "This baby will grow up with a loving family that fights for what's right, no matter how tough it gets. And if I've learned anything, it's that we don't have to face challenges alone." She sniffed, blinking back tears. "You're right," she whispered, leaning her forehead against mine. "I just want our child to have stability. After seeing how you struggled with your past, I worry about handing down any chaos." I pulled her into a gentle hug. "My past taught me to value honesty and resilience. We'll raise our child with those values, not the old shadows." She nodded, relaxing in my arms. In that moment, the harsh winter and financial strains felt secondary. Our unity mattered most. Eventually, the worst of the snow receded, revealing muddy fields and battered fences. We'd lost some income, but not enough to sink the ranch. William, recovered from his illness, grumbled about how everything needed repairs. Jonah lined up extra help, determined to fix every broken fence post before calving season ramped up. One morning the sun broke through gray clouds, and a few birds chirped timidly in the chilly air, a promise of spring. Walking hand in hand with Aubrey across the yard, I felt the relief of making it through the hardest season. She paused to catch her breath, then placed my hand on her belly, where a subtle flutter told me the baby was active. My throat tightened with awe. "I can't wait to meet her or him," I said softly, brushing a kiss to her cheek. She smiled, face glowing despite the remnants of winter's chill. "Me too." In the distance, I spotted that banker, Ned Grover, parked near the gate, probably checking on us as usual. I noticed he was eyeing the dilapidated fences and muddy fields. His expression carried a tinge of smugness, as if hoping we'd fail. But I stiffened my spine, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. "We'll show him," Aubrey muttered under her breath, also noticing Ned. "This ranch doesn't fold so easily." Her quiet determination mirrored my own. Regardless of the winter's toll, the baby's impending arrival, or the banker's judgments, we'd fight for Doubly Ranch and the family we were building. Trials would come, but we'd face them together, united by love, guided by the lessons of adversity. Spring finally burst across the land with wildflowers and fresh grass. The ranch seemed to come alive overnight, the cattle grazing eagerly on the new growth, and the warmth of the sun carrying a sense of renewal. Our finances, though still recovering from winter's pinch, edged back into safer territory as we carefully sold a portion of our stock at decent prices. Amid the bustle, Aubrey's belly grew rounder by the day. We'd set up a makeshift nursery in our renovated bunkhouse, painting the walls a calming sage green. William and Helen checked on us constantly, fussing over every detail. Jonah pretended to be indifferent, but I'd catch him peeking into the nursery, a soft smile tugging his lips whenever he saw the tiny crib we assembled. Then, on a warm afternoon, as we were finishing chores, Aubrey doubled over with a gasp. Her eyes widened and she clutched my arm. "It's time," she whispered, voice trembling. Panic and exhilaration collided in my chest. We rushed her to the local clinic where her colleague, a trusted doctor, took over. Hours blurred as she labored, gripping my hand so tightly I thought my bones would crack. I whispered encouragement, tears slipping down my cheeks at the raw intensity of it all. Once, I might have questioned my capacity to handle this kind of vulnerability no more. Finally, a tiny cry split the air, and the doctor lifted a squirming, red-faced infant into our view. My breath caught. It was a girl, just as Aubrey had guessed. Awe and relief flooded me as they placed her in Aubrey's arms. She stared down, tears in her eyes, and then looked up at me. "She's beautiful," I choked out, voice ragged. "Absolutely perfect." Aubrey laughed, a tearful, joyful sound. "We did it," she whispered, stroking the baby's soft cheek. I leaned in, kissing both my wife's forehead and our daughter's brow. In that moment, the barn, the expansions, the bank struggles, everything else vanished. All that mattered was our new family. Looking ahead, word spread fast. By the next day, William, Helen, and Jonah had arrived to greet the baby Emily. We named her. Helen openly wept as she held her first grandchild. William beamed with pride, and Jonah seemed a little awkward but clearly touched. The sense of continuity struck me. Years ago, I'd fled my old life, never imagining I'd stand in a hospital room surrounded by genuine love. We brought Emily home to Doubly Ranch a couple of days later. Despite the exhaustion etched on Aubrey's face, her eyes glowed whenever she cradled Emily. The bunkhouse felt warmer than ever, cozy, secure. At night, I'd wake to Emily's cries and rock her gently, marveling at how a man once consumed by revenge could find purpose in comforting a tiny soul in the dark. Time rarely stands still on a ranch. A year after Emily's birth, Doubly Ranch thrived. We'd weathered market fluctuations, expanded the philanthropic fund, and even built a modest workshop for Jonah to tinker with ranch equipment. Springtime meant new calves bounding in the fields, and the once barren land from Hartley's sale now blossomed under our careful management. Emily grew into a bright-eyed toddler, toddling across the yard, grabbing fistfuls of grass to show whoever would look. Her laughter echoed through the house each morning, a constant reminder of how far I'd come from the bitterness that once fueled me. Aubrey balanced her vet practice with motherhood, occasionally handing Emily to a doting Helen while she responded to urgent animal calls. One sunlit afternoon, Jonah and I repaired a fence near the stream. Emily toddled about, supervised by a cheerful ranch hand, picking up pebbles and giggling at the horses. I hammered the last nail, pausing to wipe sweat from my brow. That's when a memory of Melanie flashed through my mind, her cold, mocking grin on the day I left. Once, that recollection would have filled me with rage or sorrow. Now it felt strangely distant, like a faint echo in a canyon long deserted. Jonah caught my faraway look. "You all right?" he asked, handing me a bottle of water. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking about how different life is now." I gestured at Emily, who squealed in delight as she discovered a speckled frog near the water's edge. I never imagined this kind of happiness. Jonah shrugged, a small grin tugging at his lips. "You earned it. Don't let the past weigh you down." I swigged the water, letting his words sink in. He was right. The ghosts of betrayal no longer haunted me. They'd shaped me, yes, but I was guided by something stronger now: love, duty, hope for the future. That evening, after tucking Emily into her crib, I wandered outside. The sky was streaked with vivid purples and oranges, the setting sun painting the horizon in soft fire. I found Aubrey by the fence, gazing at the land that was once Hartley's. She turned as I approached, a gentle smile on her lips. "Emily's asleep?" she asked softly. "Out like a light," I confirmed. We fell into a contented silence, leaning against the fence side by side, arms grazing each other's. She exhaled. "A year ago, we were just figuring out how to merge the ranches. Now look at us parents, landowners, making philanthropic moves, all that fuss with the bank, it feels surreal." I rested my hand atop hers on the fence. "Sometimes I'm shocked by my own transformation," I admitted. "When I left my old life, all I wanted was to hide and hurt Melanie as payback. And now you're building a legacy," she finished quietly, looking at me with affectionate pride. "One that's about more than revenge." I pressed my forehead to hers, a slow swell of gratitude filling my chest. The ranch, the expansions, the philanthropic loans, Emily's giggles echoing through the yard, these were the real fruits of my journey. A year ago, I might have been too consumed by bitterness to even appreciate them. Now I savored every moment like a gift I never saw coming. As dusk settled, Aubrey and I made our way to the far edge of the property. From this vantage point, the entire ranch spread out below. Barns, pastures, a faint glow from the house windows. Crickets sang in the brush, and the soft hum of the evening breeze brushed our skin. I remembered the day I first arrived here, broken, angry, hiding from the world. This land had become my refuge, then my home, and finally the foundation of a new life. Aubrey's arm slipped around my waist, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "we should probably get back soon. Emily won't stay asleep forever, and I still have to send some emails for my next vet appointments. I chuckled, gazing at the last rays of sunlight vanishing behind the hills. Yeah, I agreed. Responsibilities never quit on a ranch or in parenthood. But I let myself have one more moment here, soaking in the tranquility. The old resentments had faded to a distant memory, replaced by the quiet joy of a man who found his way from betrayal to belonging. I closed my eyes, picturing the child we were raising, the land we were nurturing, and the love that bound us. No regrets. The transformation was complete. I had carved out a life from the ruins of deception, forging a future with my own hands. When I opened my eyes again, the ranch lay peaceful under the evening glow, a testament to resilience and hope. With a gentle nudge, Aubrey turned me back toward the house. We walked together, arms linked, the shadows stretching behind us in the fading light no longer menacing shapes of the past, but comforting outlines of the life we'd built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, yes, but we'd face them side by side, secure in the knowledge that our story had shifted from one of betrayal to one of lasting love.